again, there was a lot of pressure on this jury, I'm sure, for all of them to get this right, because this is now the first president who has not only been indicted in a criminal trial, he has sat at a defense table at a criminal trial, and he is about to hear the verdict in his criminal trial. Now, in the event that he would be found guilty, there would not be a sentencing at this point because his attorneys would likely appeal. So there would not be a sentencing. In addition to that, it will be the judge who imposes the sentencing, Judge Juan Merchan. Do you guys have any questions for me at this point?
No, I mean, it is interesting what you had to say, Linda. This certainly took everyone by shock, again, after we all got word that they were going to be dismissed for the day, only to find out that they actually had a verdict come in. It seems like in the interim from when the judge had made that announcement, he was unaware they had a verdict and was only told once they were alerted that they were going home. Correct. So as you mentioned, I mean, really a crazy turn of events. I think most people had figured at earliest this was going to come down sometime tomorrow.
And it's certainly most of online speculation, people trying to read the tea leaves throughout this. You kind of mentioned some of the body language that Trump had inside of the courtroom. Would that lead you to speculate one way or another of where you think this is going to head?
You know what? We can't read the tea leaves about anything with this case. I mean, once it's, or any case for that matter, really, everybody tries to. Legal experts try to do it. Journalists try to do it. But pundits try to do it. But you really can't do it because 8 times out of 10, you turn out being wrong. The jury selection here, going into this trial, they originally said, oh, my gosh, it's going to take so long. It's going to take weeks before they find a jury. And it's going to be hard to find a jury that's not biased. It took a few days. That took everybody by surprise. So we have no idea what his arms crossed in front of him really mean. If he thinks that he's going to be found guilty or innocent, we don't know.
Yeah, neither does he. That's a great point, Linda. We do appreciate your perspective and experience as always. All right, joining us now to break down the latest is former Brooklyn Assistant District Attorney Imran Ansari. Imran, thanks for joining us on this historic afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, jurors spent much of the morning re-listening to testimony from Michael Cohen and David Pecker, as we heard Linda mention, about that August 2015 meeting at Trump Tower where this whole alleged scheme sort of came to life. What, if anything, does that tell you as we are now in the process of hearing that there is a verdict and we are just waiting to hear it from the jury?
Well, again, you know, you're trying to read the tea leaves, and now we are really on the precipice of finding out what this verdict is. And I did not think it was coming down today. I didn't think it was even going to come down possibly tomorrow. I thought it was going to spill into next week because you had the readbacks that occurred this morning. And it was indicative that the jury was really thinking through the case, as they should, and considering the charges. But you have a 34-count indictment. And I was with you both when the indictment was first released. And it's a complex indictment. The jury has to consider rather complex legal aspects as those charges were given to them by the judge. And I thought that this was going to spill over till tomorrow, till possibly next week. And now we have a verdict. What does that mean? When you have a verdict coming in a more quick fashion, and again, this is just speculation. We don't know what's going to happen, but we will soon find out. People think it may be to the benefit of the prosecution. When it's more delayed, they're thinking through things. They're thinking maybe there is some reasonable doubt here, and the defense starts getting emboldened. What we received today in terms of the readbacks, clearly it answered the jurors' questions, and now we're just waiting to find out what that verdict is.
Yeah, I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit more, because we know that jurors have asked the judge to reread his rain metaphor instructions, which is primarily an instruction that is favorable to the prosecution. Basically, jurors can infer certain facts based on circumstantial evidence. So why do you think they would ask that?
So circumstantial evidence, that concept, often a juror or jury will ask for that to be read back, or they grasp it the first time. But it's indicative that they're understanding now that they don't need direct evidence that a crime was committed, but they can rely on circumstantial evidence that a crime was committed. And if they have taken that instruction and you don't necessarily have direct evidence that Donald Trump committed any crime here, but they now are connecting the dots based on the circumstantial evidence, that can be indicative, and again, not sure, that they have found that the prosecution has connected the dots. But then again, they could also be getting that charge and receiving that charge and saying, okay, well, they haven't connected the dots. And
all right, Imran, sorry, we have to interrupt you for just a moment. We just got an update, a very important one from the AP. The jury has found former President Donald Trump guilty on some charges in the hush money trial. The verdict is still being read as we speak. So a split verdict, Imran. Walk us through that. I feel like that was a prospect that a lot of people had actually anticipated. Guilty on some counts, we don't know which ones yet, and not guilty on others.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of absorbing this with you right now. It's a 34-count indictment. There was various evidence that was submitted to support some of those counts, and perhaps it was weak on others. We now know that the jury has found Donald Trump guilty on some of those counts, and we, I guess, wait to find out whether they were hung or they acquitted on the others. With a multi-count indictment, it's not uncommon for a jury to render a verdict of guilt on some counts and innocence.
Imran, we're going to have to interrupt you real fast because we're just getting some word in that he is found guilty on all of the counts is the update right now. So your initial reaction to that right now?
Unprecedented that you have a former president now guilty on a 34-count indictment here, felony charges that go to the heart of election law if you read those counts. And it's a swift verdict. It's actually a swift verdict where I think myself and many legal analysts thought that this jury would spill over to next week. They clearly found that the prosecution proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. That doesn't mean that the defense now will capitalize on certain things during the course of the trial for an appeal. We know there will be an appeal. I can safely say that Donald Trump will appeal this conviction, but you have a historic event here.
We certainly do. Imran, let me cut you off right there, and we will check back in with you shortly. In the meantime, we're going to head back to Linda Schmidt, who looks like she's joined by Arthur Idell outside the courthouse with her first reaction and his to the news that Donald Trump has been found guilty on all 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Linda, wow, what an hour. We went from not thinking there'd be a verdict to finding out he's been found guilty by the jury on all 34 counts.
Nobody expected this. From the moment the man was indicted in March of 23, nobody expected that. Nobody expected this. This is a real shocker today. Arthur, thank you so much for being here because you have such great experience and perspective. First of all, your reaction to the fact that they deliberated for just about 8.5 hours.
Well, after I heard the judge's charge yesterday, which was a unique charge, in other words, no one's ever been charged with this before, and it really was slanted in favor of the prosecutor. It made the prosecutor's job a lot easier because they had to find him guilty of the records, but any underlying crime besides falsification of the records. They didn't have to be unanimous about whether they falsified records to commit election fraud or to commit tax fraud or to commit any other crime. So the judge said 4 of you could feel that he wanted to commit one crime, 4 could feel another, 4 another. Once I heard that, I said, okay, I actually go and agree with President Trump. Mother Teresa would have a hard time getting an acquittal under that set of circumstances.
Yeah, and that's what Trump said yesterday. But today now, there were 34 felony counts. They found him guilty, and it had to be a unanimous verdict here in order for it to be a guilty verdict. They found him guilty on all 34 counts. So they found that he falsified business records. And then the next phase was, in order to get a guilty verdict, they would have had to have all agreed that he did that in order to interfere with the 2016 election and affect the outcome, which is the felony here in New York State because it violates New York election law.
Well, the judge actually gave them more options than just that. That's one of the options. But yesterday, the judge said it could be that crime, or they filled out 1099s for Michael Cohen that were not true. They were not accurate. So the judge said, even if you don't think they were doing it to affect the election, but they were cheating on taxes, you could find them guilty for that. And then he threw in a catch-all like any other crime. So they did not have to be unanimous on what secondary crime Donald Trump was trying to commit. And Linda, what's very crucial here is they didn't need to prove that Donald Trump did this alone. It was acting in concert.
Right.
So it was with him and Cohen and Pecker and Weisselberg and all of them together. So Donald Trump didn't have to open up a logbook and fill things out, or go to a drop-down screen and pick out legal.
Do it himself, but it was either he had to do it or he had somebody else do it for him.
And that's one of the charges the judge gave the jury, acting in concert. And he read that, and that is a standard charge. It's acting with others with basically the same intent. And that's what they pretty easily found him guilty of. I mean, they weren't out for a long time. They asked for Pecker's testimony, who was their strongest witness, to corroborate Cohen's testimony. And obviously they did that. And here we are. And as we speak, I'm assuming the judge is setting a sentencing date, which is typically about 6 weeks out, but nothing in this trial has been typical.
Right. And obviously Trump is going to appeal. So if he appeals, how does that affect the sentencing date?
The appeal will have no effect on the sentencing date. If you want to play out a crazy scenario, if the judge sentenced Donald Trump to a minute in jail, his lawyers can run to the appellate division and ask for what's called bail pending appeal, which is judges of the appellate division, which is uptown, please don't put him in jail, keep him out while we perfect the appeal. On an E felony in this courthouse, someone with no criminal record whatsoever, there's typically no jail time.
Okay, one of our anchors, Bianca, has a question for you. Bianca, give it to me because he doesn't have IFB. What's your question?
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked to Arthur many times, especially in terms of this case, but one thing I found interesting from the jury instructions was that the judge pointed to specific pieces of evidence. Do judges normally do that in a case like this?
Okay, Bianca's question is, when the judge was reading his instructions to the jury yesterday, he actually made reference to certain pieces of evidence. Is that normal in cases for judges to do that during the instruction? Because what they're doing with the instruction is telling and teaching the jury how to apply the law correctly to the evidence in the charges.
Yes, judges, when they're basically giving a law school class to the jury, they are allowed to what's called marshal the evidence. They're not supposed to show any prejudice regarding that, but they are allowed to use examples from the evidence that's been legally admitted to give the jury an example of, and they're going to say, well, the prosecutor felt that, the defense is saying Michael Cohen lied. Well, here's the charge on credibility. And then he reads what jurors should take into consideration when they're judging the credibility of an individual.
Right. Okay, now with Michael Cohen, too, the judge said you cannot convict Donald Trump just strictly on Michael Cohen's testimony because he is a convicted liar. Long history of lying. Lied before Congress, was disbarred, served time in prison for lying. So they couldn't do it just on Michael Cohen's testimony. So the fact that they asked for not just his testimony being reread, but also Pecker's testimony being reread from that meeting at Trump Tower in August of 2015, that pretty much says it all, don't you think?
As soon as I heard that the first note was Pecker, I knew what was going on in that jury room based on decades of being here. It's some jurors came in there and said, I'm not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, and other jurors said, well, look, we'll convince you beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's hear what Pecker has to say, and we'll put it together with what Cohen said, and you'll see that they jive, and that's the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And obviously, those jurors who had doubts, those doubts were set aside by the readbacks of the testimony.
Okay, and of course, we keep mentioning David Pecker. He, of course, is the former head of the National Enquirer and a very longtime friend of Donald Trump. Steve, our anchor, has a question. Steve, you want to give it to me?
Yeah, sure. I was just curious, Arthur, obviously this is what he does for a living. Where does he think Trump's attorneys will focus on in their appeal of this verdict?
Yeah, Steve is asking, with all of your experience, where do you think that Trump's attorneys, what areas do you think they're going to focus on as far as their appeal of this verdict?
So if I was the appellate lawyer, the first thing that I target is the actually essence of the case itself. And that's why this case is so odd. You never challenge the law of murder, the law of homicide, the law of robbery, the law of burglary. But here, this is such a unique set of laws that this judge has allowed in. These are misdemeanors, Linda, that are out of the statute of limitations. The only reason why they came back to life is because it's to create a second felony. And this judge said to those jurors, you don't have to be unanimous on what that lower crime is. that's unique. It's never been done before, and it needs to be challenged both at the appellate division here and, if need be, at the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in the state of New York.
Yeah, because originally, I mean, all falsifying business records in the state of New York is a misdemeanor, as you were just saying. And then the Manhattan DA's office bumped it up to a felony by saying that he falsified these business records in order to cover up the fact that he was trying to affect the outcome of an election, which violates New York election law.
And you're correct, Linda, and that's how it started, but it even got easier for the prosecution by the judge's ruling that they didn't have to be unanimous, that was the only reason why he did it. The judge said it was a crime to falsify the 1099 that was given to Michael Cohen, which was given to him for money that he didn't actually earn. It was to bump him up so he could pay for his taxes. So the judge said, if you think that was how a crime they were committing, you could find them guilty on that. And then he threw in, like, or any other crime you think they were committing, and that the jury does not need to be unanimous on that secondary crime. And an appellate court may say, I don't know, to make a misdemeanor that's out of the statute of limitations a felony in the statute of limitations, we feel it has to be unanimous on what that second crime is. We'll find out from the 5 judges in the appeals court, because we know there will be an appeal.
Okay, I'm being told that Donald Trump is leaving the courtroom right now, and I'm sure he's going to be approaching the cameras in the hallway. Should we be tossing to that?
The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people, and they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a sore-respect DA, and the whole thing, we didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble, but this was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for a convicted felon?
Are you going to drop out?
All right, there you have it. That was the former president saying his piece after hearing that he had just been found guilty on all 34 counts, saying the real verdict will take place November 5th, which, of course, is Election Day.
Yeah, again, we're talking about the historic verdict here. First former president convicted of these 34 counts, felonies rather. Linda, we're going to take things back over to you as you've been speaking with Arthur, who has been covering this nonstop and has a very extensive knowledge of what's really happening behind these closed doors. I know you're going to go back to Arthur's reaction about this. Maybe you can fill us up, get us up to speed on that, because it came as a shock to a lot of people, especially at this time of day right now.
Yeah, it absolutely came as a shock to everybody, because, again, it was around 10 after 4, and we were under the impression that the jury was going to be dismissed for the day. And then suddenly, about 10, 15 minutes later, everybody's scrambling, and the word comes out, there's a verdict, there's a verdict. And Morgan Mackay, again, my colleague who's been in the courtroom pretty much every day since this trial started, she sent out information saying that there were actual audible gasps in the courtroom because people could not believe it. They were in shock. So I have another question for you, though, Arthur. You know, I'm going to have a lot of them. 4 weeks of testimony now. I think there were more than, I think it was 20 witnesses.
22 maybe.
22 witnesses.
But who's counting?
All of that, they focused on David Pecker, the former head of the National Enquirer, Michael Cohen, and that meeting 2015 in Trump Tower. Are you surprised they did not ask for any readbacks on anybody else?
Well, look, as of this second, we don't know what on in the jury room, because the jury, we don't know. The jurors aren't speaking to us.
But they didn't ask for a readback, though.
No. But often what happens is they get laser focused on, like, well, what issue is it? What is it? What hurdle can you not get over? And they're like, well, that first meeting, I don't believe that, or I don't believe Michael Cohen. Okay, now don't forget, Linda, they were allowed to take notes, which is kind of customary, and apparently from Fox people inside the courtroom, they took a lot of notes. So they're able to go back and say, wait a minute, Pecker said this, Cohen said that. They're not allowed to rely on those notes, so that's why they asked for the readback. And we don't know if it was 2 people, 3 people, 1 person who needed to be swayed, but they were swayed. Let me give you a little idea of what's going on right this second. So the prosecutors are finding a private area where they're out of sight and nobody can see them to celebrate. They're obviously hugging and kissing, and Bragg should be giving them backslap. They want to make sure no one sees them do that because they're supposed to be about justice and not about taking a victory lap. The defense is in a room behind the courtroom. It's probably almost silent. In other words, you get this like deflated, totally deflated feeling, you know, of failure, of loss, and my guess is Trump is probably has the stiffest upper lip in that room. You know, I've tried many cases and I haven't gotten the result that I've wanted, so I'm not speaking, I'm not guessing. I know what it's like. There's probably some 4-letter words being thrown around, and someone will emerge as like the cheerleader, like, okay, this isn't over yet. There are so many issues that we're going to appeal on. And, you know, you hear about, oh, we're going to appeal, and most of them are not successful, as you know, because you've covered it. Many of them are successful. And this is a case, and I'm not saying this for any other reason, it's the truth. There are a lot of appellate issues because it's a unique case. You and I have covered homicides and robberies and sexual assaults, but this is a real mental puzzle from a legal point of view. Can the law do what Judge Merchan allowed them to do? Can you take old misdemeanors, stale misdemeanors, and can you bring them back to life for Donald Trump or any other citizen? And that's first and foremost going to be a challenge to those 5 judges on the First Department Court of Appeal, Appellate Division.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because a lot of critics have been saying this since the very beginning when he was indicted, that it seemed as though they took the law and they manipulated and twisted and turned it in this one particular case. Now, that's what critics will say. Of course, the DA and many other legal experts will say no, but you lean on the side of them that they manipulated it.
And Linda, I do lean on that side, and it's not just me. And if you want to take politics out of this, criminal defense attorneys in general tend to lean to the left. You know, they want more rights and all that. I know people who can't stand Donald Trump, and they said, I can't stand this case. I feel like the criminal justice system is being manipulated, the exact word Linda Schmidt just used, just to get this one guy. And it's going to be up to the Appellate Division and or the Court of Appeals, if it goes up to the highest court in the state of New York, to determine, can we start prosecuting people like this under these circumstances? Because it's never happened before. So, look, there's a first for everything. So they may say, oh, it's okay. Or they may say, we don't like this. But there's going to be a lot of political pressure in this heavily Democratic city to not overturn this verdict.
Right, and I just want to make sure here that I'm being very clear. I'm not saying that it was manipulated.
No,
I'm quoting critics saying that the law was manipulated in order to bring this case, and that's what a lot of critics have said. Now, let me ask you this, because they only, again, they only deliberated for about 8.5 hours. Do you think, and it's 12 people, do you think when they went into that room, do you think most of them had already reached their decision?
I think when most jurors go into their room, especially after the summations, they've heard openings, they've heard all the evidence, they've heard summations. As much as the judge says keep an open mind, I mean, you know, your brain functions. They had all weekend, don't forget, before summations to kind of go over some stuff in their mind, whether when they're lying in bed or they're in the shower. So, yes, I think when they walked in there, every one of them had an opinion. And clearly the majority of the opinion was guilty. And there was a couple that needed to be swayed. It seems that way. And
here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are. Okay. All right. We're going to go back inside to you guys. We're going to keep Arthur here, though, because we're definitely going to have more questions for him coming up. But back inside to you.
Indeed. All right, Linda, Arthur, we appreciate it. Thanks so much. All right, joining us now to offer some insight into today's verdict is defense attorney Carrie London. Carrie, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. So it was very upsetting to see that verdict, not because we like Trump or don't like Trump, but because 34 counts of falsifying business records on a case of first impression that 7 women and 5 men listened to, over 20 witnesses on, and deliberated for 11 hours to find him guilty of all 34 counts, I just don't think is giving the credit to the judicial system that it deserves. This was not the people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump. This was Alvin Bragg versus Donald Trump. He was out to prove a political point, and he proved that political point by getting a guilty verdict today.
So you think it would have been more convincing had they either had a split verdict or deliberated for a longer amount of time, in essence?
Exactly. I think there's no way that those jurors in 11 hours didn't go in with a preconceived notion or a preconceived idea of finding him guilty. For them to only deliberate on 34 counts with that amount of witnesses and come to a verdict of guilty on all 34 counts in that short amount of time shows me that those 12 jurors did not go in with an open mind. Those 12 jurors went in with a mind to convict, because you have to understand the entire prosecution's case was circumstantial. It was the rain example. Right now, there are no windows in the studio, Steve. We can't see it's raining outside. If somebody were to come in with an umbrella that was dripping or a rain jacket or boots, you could say it might be raining outside. That was the entire prosecution's case. There was no smoking gun in this case, which is why I don't see how they came to a verdict that quickly.
However, somebody can be convicted on circumstantial evidence, as we've seen throughout the years. Talk to us about what happens behind closed doors with the jury. They've received over 50 pages of jury instruction. However, they're not allowed to bring that back into the deliberation room. What do they do?
So when they go back, the foreperson is the person who's the juror number 1. And that person, no matter who they want to be the foreperson, whoever was selected as juror number 1 is the foreperson. That person's in charge of writing notes. The reason the judge doesn't want to give the law to the jurors in the back is he doesn't want them dissecting every single word and taking their own meaning on what it could mean. He wants them in the courtroom listening together as a group to the actual charges. And taking an hour to read jury charges is standard in every criminal case. This was 34 counts, so it was a little longer, but that was absolutely standard in this case. Any readback they want, the stenographer gets on the witness stand and actually reads back the testimony, and any law they want read back, Judge Merchant reads back.
All right, and I want to ask you the same question I asked Arthur. As a defense attorney, we know there's going to be an appeal to this for certain. Where does it go from here, and how would you defend it if Trump was your client?
So the first thing that happens is he'll be sentenced on July 11th to either a conditional discharge or probation. He's not getting jail. We know that because the DA's office did not ask for him to be put in today. Most times, if you're convicted of a felony, the DA's office will ask that the defendant be put into jail. That didn't happen today. So we know he's not going to get a jail sentence on July 11th. The next step is perfecting the appeal. This is a case of first impression. No one's ever brought charges like this. No one's ever been convicted on charges like this. Judge Merchant told them that there were 4 different crimes that they could possibly think he committed without actually thinking he committed those crimes in order to find him guilty of the falsifying business records. So the appeal will absolutely be a strong appeal. Trump's going to have good lawyers. It's not going to be the same lawyers who did the criminal trial, because appeals lawyers are going to be separate from the criminal defense lawyers at his trial, and I believe this will be overturned on appeal 100%.
You mentioned the options that Judge Merchant gave the jury. Hey, for the secondary crime, you do have some options to pick from. There doesn't have to be a unanimous decision on that. Does that happen in any other case?
I've never heard it happening in the 20 years that I've been practicing criminal defense, because everything needs to be A to Z. You need to cross your T's, dot your I's, dot your lowercase J's. And him giving them that option, I just think, opens the door to an appellate court to read this and say, we're throwing this out.
All right, Carrie, let's pause you right there. We're going to go to Michelle Ross, who was inside the overflow room during today's deliberations when the verdict was read.
Yeah, she joins us now outside the court to tell us about what she saw and the reaction from the media. Michelle, give us, just a breakdown of everything that happened today. As you can see, a lot of people saying this is shocking.
Right, and having been in both the overflow room now and the actual courtroom, I have to say that throughout most of this, the overflow room was a bit of more of the reactive room. When there are certain exchanges happening during the testimony, they would laugh a little louder compared to those in the courtroom. But for this, there wasn't that much of a commotion inside the room, and I have to say it's probably because we were prefaced by one of the court officers who said to keep outbursts to a minimum, and he also said to stay in our seats until we're given further instructions. So when that first count came down, when the first verdict came down, there were maybe a couple of audible gasps from reporters in the first row, but after that, it had just gone on to 2, 3, 4, up to the 34th count. It remained pretty silent. There were 2 people, though, who were members of the public. 2 of the last seats of the last benches in the overflow room were reserved for them, but there were only 2 people in all of those 2 rows, and they didn't even really react that much either. I did speak to one of them as we left. She said that she got here this morning, didn't have to wait more than an hour to get inside the courtroom, and she said that she also just wanted to be part of history. She's been following this trial for the last 7 weeks, wanted to see what it came down to. She's never experienced anything like this before, but it was interesting to see a member of the public sit inside and watch this happen as it was going on. She didn't even think she was going to get into the building, but she did get into the overflow room with other reporters. Now, I was also able to see there are, just to paint the picture for you as to what the overflow room is, it's basically the room down the hall from the actual courtroom where the judge is, where Donald Trump is, where his defense, prosecution, where the jury is. So in the overflow room, it's the reporters not in the actual courtroom, and there are 3 screens set up, and we can see images from inside the courtroom, video from inside. And once the verdict came down, we were able to see all 3 of Trump's defense lawyers, Todd Blanche, Emile Beauvais, Susan Necheles, stone-cold faces, as well as the former president, also a straight stone-cold face on. Susan Necheles had her hand in her hand with her elbow resting on the table, Todd Blanche rubbing his eyes. So clearly they were unhappy with the result of this. But that's overall the reaction from every single person in the overflow room and from what I was able to see on the screen in the courtroom.
Very well, Michelle, we appreciate it. Thank you so much. And now we're going to go back to Imran Ansari with his reaction to the verdict. And specifically, we just heard a defense attorney on set with us, Carrie London, mention he thinks this verdict will be overturned on appeal. Imran, what do you think about that? Are you of that mind? Do you have a different opinion? What do you think is going to happen when this goes to the inevitable appeal?
As points to bring before that appellate court in terms of the fairness of the trial and some of the evidence that was omitted from the trial and the objections and how Judge Marchand ruled on it. But you got to keep in mind that this appeal is going to be going to the first department, the appellate division first department here in New York. Those judges are typically judges who have ascended to the appellate bench from the trial courts, including New York County. And I don't know if they're going to be looking at this trial differently from the way, let's say, Judge Marchand ruled on the certain objections or the certain evidence that could or could not be coming into court here. So I certainly think that the Trump team has arguments to be putting forth before that appellate court. Whether that bench then looks at this trial and deems it to be something that was unfair and that Donald Trump didn't get a fair trial remains to be seen. But you expect the appeal to go forward. But you have to keep in mind that the first department bench are comprised of judges who are coming from New York County or Bronx County, and their rulings may not be different, or they may not be looking at the rulings of Judge Marchand in a different lens than Judge Marchand did. They may not be looking to upset this conviction after this jury rendered a unanimous verdict, whether it be in short term or long term. But that's going to have to be in the appellate paper. You'll see how the defense team for Donald Trump articulates those appellate arguments in their papers and before the court, but you know it's coming.
All right, Imran, thank you so much for that. We're going to turn things over to Morgan Mackay. She has been in the courtroom for days following this. Morgan, your take on everything happening today is you've been giving us live updates nonstop following this. So walk us through your reaction. I guess you have been seeing firsthand the reaction from former President Donald Trump, as well as his team and the prosecution.
Exactly, Stephen, Natasha. So let me walk you through exactly sort of what happened. So around 4:15, the judge came out and said that he's going to be dismissing the jury at around 4:30. Then he came back in at about 4:35, and he said that the jury had reached a verdict. Everyone in the courtroom gasped. Some reporters had already started to pack up, were getting ready to leave. So this caught everyone a little bit by surprise. But they said they needed an extra 30 minutes. When the jury came in, everyone was quiet. Trump stared straight ahead. He didn't looked at the jury, and he just stared with his arms folded, staring straight ahead. Now, Blanche, his attorney, Todd Blanche, while the verdict was being read, he put his head in his hands a few times throughout the verdict. Then they went through each charge. So there's 34 felony charges that Trump was facing. And this made up the 34 checks and invoices that prosecutors say that Trump falsified in order to provide hush money payments. So pretty much this case boils down to prosecutors say that Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, paid Stormy Daniels, an adult film star actress, $130,000 to keep quiet about her alleged sexual encounter with Trump ahead of the 2016 election. Now, they say that when he falsely logged these checks and invoices, when he repaid Michael Cohen as legal expenses. Now, the jurors had to do two things to convict Trump. They had to unanimously decide that Trump falsified all 34 business records, so all 34 checks and invoices, and then they say that he did so in order to conceal a second crime, which prosecutors allege was a conspiracy to aid an election by unlawful means. So the judge read out each one of the 34 counts, and the jury convicted him of each one. All 34. They said he was guilty. Then the judge dismissed him, and then they decided to set sentencing to July 11th. His attorney Blanche asked that they push this back to mid or end July, but because Trump has other court obligations right now, he's facing numerous other court trials while this is going on. So the judge decided to set the date to July 11th. Blanche also tried to push back and ask for a mistrial, since he said that Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, that he lied on the stand, committed perjury, but that motion was denied. So again, all 34 counts Trump was found guilty of. As Trump was leaving the courtroom, he had a very serious expression on his face. He reached back and patted his lawyer, but he looked very upset, actually. And I hadn't really seen that from him throughout this entire trial, but he did look a bit emotional as he left the courtroom, and he stared straight ahead. Usually he makes eyes at reporters, he says different things to them, or he'll make motions. Today, straight ahead, and he left the courtroom. Stephen, Natasha, back to you.
Yeah, Morgan, as you are one of the very few people that have been inside this, watching this firsthand, what was your first reaction? As I'm sure you talked to other people around you when that verdict was reached, did you have any inclination that it could go one way or the other?
So speaking to a lot of the reporters around me, I felt like we really thought that this verdict was going to be handed down tomorrow. We felt like today was sort of wrapped up. So when that verdict was announced that it was going to be happening, everyone was really surprised. But at the same time, I also think that a lot of people were expecting a conviction because of how ambiguous the second charge that they had to convict him on. So they not only had to convict that he falsified business records, but they also had to say that he did so because he wanted to help his chances in the election, and he did so by unlawful means. Now, the jury didn't have to agree on what unlawful means those were, so it did kind of open it up a little bit to make it easier for the jury to come to a decision altogether. But again, I think there was more of an expectation of a hung jury than a full conviction on all 34 counts, but there was an understanding that if there was a conviction on one, a lot of people guessed it would be a conviction on all 34.
Yeah, no, indeed, Morgan. It certainly was surprising. You sort of touched on what I was going to ask you, too. Obviously, you're surrounded by some of the most seasoned court reporters, court watchers, expecting like exactly what you thought was going to come down with the verdict. But I think you just said it right there, that we thought there was going to be some sort of mixed verdict as opposed to guilty on all 34 was certainly the conventional wisdom going into today.
Exactly. I think a lot of people thought that there was going to be a mix, but it's sort of hard. I mean, if you have 34 checks and invoices, they're all sort of the same thing. There was different parts where they came from, so some were invoices, some came from Trump's trust, some came from his personal account, some he signed, some were logged by other people. So I think a lot of people were just a little confused if they might maybe say, oh, well, the checks that came from him, those we're going to convict him on, but maybe those that were signed by Donald Donald Trump Jr., for example, those maybe wouldn't convict him on. But again, they found him guilty of all 34. They believed that he was behind having, for example, Donald Trump Jr. sign those checks. So I think people were a little bit surprised, but overall, people were just watching the jury so closely as this verdict was read. And a lot of them, they didn't really look at Trump while the verdict was being read. They were sort of darting back and forth between the press a little bit and the judge, but mostly staying focused on the judge. I think they really understood the weight of the assignment. And that is actually one thing I want to add about the jury themselves. They paid so close attention throughout this trial. They took notes throughout the entire trial. They were furiously scribbling. I didn't see any of them really doze off ever during the trial. And there were parts that did get a little bit tedious at times. So I would just say this is probably the most attentive of a jury that I've ever seen at a trial.
Well, all right, Morgan, we appreciate it. And of course, Donald Trump had plenty to say after that verdict came down a short while ago. Let's listen to his reaction as he walked out of the courtroom.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one, with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
All right, that was the reaction, of course, just a short while ago from Donald Trump on his way out of the courtroom after being convicted on all 34 counts related to this case. Certainly, he had a lot to say, typically what we would expect him to say in a moment like this, of course, rigged case, etc.
They're going to fight to the end and win, but today he was delivered a historic blow. We're going to turn things over to Linda Schmidt, who is standing by with retired Judge George Casso. Linda, obviously you're talking to someone that has tried many cases in his life. His thoughts on what just happened today?
That's right. First of all, thanks so much, Judge Grasso, for being with us today. First of all, you're a retired judge. How many years now in New York State?
I had just about 13 years as a judge and over 30 years as in New York City Police Department.
Okay, there you go. Then that's how you and we go back to the NYPD. That's how you and I know each other. Now, you and I were talking earlier today, and you were telling me that you were actually encouraged that the jury had asked for the judge to reread 30 pages of his instructions. The instructions were 55 pages. He did that yesterday, the 55. They asked him to reread 30 of those pages today, and you said to me, Linda, I find that encouraging that these folks here, they're putting a lot of time into this, and you didn't anticipate a verdict until at least tomorrow, but probably not even until next week.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was encouraged because it showed me how serious this jury was taking this, that they actually asked for such an extensive readback of the judge's instructions. And given a case of this nature with some of its unique complications, that showed they were serious about following the rule of law and getting the rules of the road. I kind of felt that we were maybe looking towards the end of the day tomorrow. Right. I thought that they were going to take a full day today, sleep on it, come back tomorrow, but it seems like they had a real unified state of mind, and they just, once they got the readbacks. And another thing about the readbacks is this specifically requesting the testimony of David Pecker. that they requested. That was testimony that largely corroborated Michael Cohen. So it also indicated that they were looking to see if those pieces of the puzzle fit. The reason that they came to 34 counts, in my opinion, from what I've seen, they largely credited significant portions of the testimony of Michael Cohen.
So even though Michael Cohen is a convicted liar, and actually Todd Blanche had called him in his closing argument the gloat, playing off of GOAT, the greatest liar of all time, even if the jury would have felt that, yeah, he is a liar, we don't believe some of what he says, we believe this conversation happened in Trump Tower between him, David Pecker, and Donald Trump, because David Pecker, who is not a known liar, is corroborating what Michael Cohen has testified to.
And was obvious during his testimony, and at the conclusion of the testimony, he still has affection for defendant, now convicted felon, Donald Trump. So they ended up at the same place with key aspects of testimony, but they came in with different pedigrees and backgrounds and certainly views on the defendant. Also, let's not forget about, there was literally like a truckload of evidence supporting Michael Cohen. And in particular, People's Exhibit 35, it's often referred to as the smoking gun exhibit, which is the handwritten notes of Alan Weisselberg grossing up the $130,000 that Cohen paid for the hush money for Stormy Daniels, bringing that ultimately to $420,000. Written, by the way, on the First Republic bank statement that Cohen used to take the $130,000 out of his home equity loan, put it in this LLC, Essential Consulting, and then ship the money off to Keith Davidson, Stormy Daniels' attorney. So there was real solid, tangible evidence in addition to other witness testimony that supported Cohen, and it was a powerful case by the prosecution. That's why the jury was able to find Mr. Trump now guilty of 34 separate felony counts.
Right, and you bring up Weisselberg, a former CEO of the Trump Organization for, I think it was 40 or 50 plus years, and he's now serving time.
Right. Yeah, he's serving time, but his notes lived on the exhibit, which he filed away in Trump Organization records.
Right. And I just want to point out, too, you have been in court every single day since this case started because you were interested in following this case and you wanted to see it and hear it for yourself, correct?
100%. American history, legal history. This is something that's in our history books right now. People are going to be talking about this 100 years from now. And I believe at the present moment in time, it's very important for I think Richard Nixon said famously once, the people need to know their president is not a crook. That didn't work out too good for Nixon in the end. Right. And now we had this particular former president who wants to be our president again. Right. Whether he likes it or not, he's got 34 felony counts that he's been convicted of in a fair trial in New York City by a jury of 12, unanimously, after a day and a half of deliberation. The American people deserve to know that and consider that.
All right, Judge Grasso, thanks so much for joining me. I really do appreciate your perspective, enlightening, so thank you again.
Thank you.
Back inside to you.
All right, Linda, thank you so much for that. As you heard the retired judge say there, American history, legal history, people are going to be talking about this 100 years from now. Well, we're going to turn things over to Teresa Perillo, who's been talking to people there on the streets in Lower Manhattan. Teresa, the reaction that you've gotten from people so far?
Yeah, not so surprising, Bianca and Steve, because Collect Palm Park, which is the park directly across the street, is sort of split in two at this point. One side are Trump supporters, the others are not. But I can tell you, this verdict, the fact that the former president guilty on all counts, is really the talk of the town. People are stopping by, asking us. As a matter of fact, the mail carrier just walked by. She said, "What's all the commotion about?" We told her, and she was quite surprised as well, as she's out here on her mail route. I mean, that's really New York for you. People get information by word of mouth as they walk around, and that's what's happening. So I'll step out of the way so you can see Collect Palm Park behind me. As I mentioned, one side is put it this way, one side anti-Trump, one side pro-Trump. There is the side where you see lock him up and Don the felon. That would obviously be the anti-Trump side. One person told me finally some accountability. Another person directly behind him on the other side of the fence screaming to us, lies, lies, it's all lies. They believe this is directly tied to the former president's political ambitions, and they say it is an effort to keep him from the White House once again. Take a listen.
It's been a long time that he's gotten away with just about anything. Finally, some accountability. That's how it feels.
It's a very sad day for America. That's all I'm going to say.
Why do you feel that way?
Because this is political prosecution, and there's absolutely nothing behind this case. And I hope they appeal it.
I'm kind of shocked that they actually found him guilty.
Why are you shocked?
Because people of his magnitude don't usually see the inside of a jail. And it still remains to be seen that he's actually going to see the inside of a jail. So with that being said, the jury's still up, or if he's actually going to see the inside of a jail.
What's interesting is across the street, there's a good mix of people who have been here every day and those who only, as they told us, came down to witness history. Now, again, for those who are saying that this is just an effort to keep the former president from the White House, we do know he has been competitive in the polls as of late. We also know that this conviction won't keep him from running for the White House. It can't even keep him from being elected as well, if that should happen. He only, in New York, can't vote for himself, although once he serves his sentence, whatever that might be, we'll find that out mid-July, then his voting rights would be restored. That's according to the NYCLU. But again, he could win here in New York or anywhere else around the country, and he could even serve from prison. It remains to be seen, Steve and Bianca, if the party would want to replace him. Again, being that the polls are looking in some states in his favor, it remains to be seen if that would actually happen. But here, again, a lot of his supporters have decided to wait this out. They wanted to be here to see this, and they wanted to try to get a glimpse of the former president, although to our understanding, he has not come out and said anything. That's the latest from Lower Manhattan. Back to you guys in the studio.
That's right. We've seen the video of him heading back, presumably to Trump Tower or the airport, heading back to Mar-a-Lago, either way, over the past couple minutes live on the screen as well. All right, let's go back to Carrie London now with a little bit more reaction. So, of course, we all know this is heading towards an appeal. On the same note, the judge in the case also knew this would also be the most scrutinized case potentially of all time and tried to do everything he could to make it appeal-proof.
Yes and no. I think the judge knew because he came from a Democratic background and because Donald Trump was tweeting all of this negative stuff about him that he was preconceived to find him guilty. I think that Judge Merchant did try, but I think there was one objection sustained during closings when Todd Blanche said, you're going to send someone to prison over the word of a professional liar. And Judge Merchant sustained that objection, yelled at the defense attorney in front of the jury, and then gave
you can't do that. As an attorney, you can't do that in front of the jury. You can't let them know what the repercussions of their decision is. You know that.
I've tried hundreds of cases in all of my summations.
But you would know not to do that, right?
I say that. You say that. It's commonplace. You're allowed to see, technically under the law, you can't talk about sentencing, but you say, you're really going to convict this guy, you're going to send him to jail over the word of this person.
But that's sending him to jail. I mean, isn't that the same thing?
Yes
you know
and
it
no.
is.
Yes and no, but I didn't think that was a good objection.
Okay.
But
Carrie,
I think,
let's talk about the appeals process now, and you're talking about maybe a different team of lawyers. What is something that they have to do this time around that would get this appeal to go through?
Well, they have to file a notice of appeal within 30 days, which I'm sure they will be filing today or tomorrow. And then they're going to have to get all the transcripts from the trial, the transcripts or the minutes from each witness, and they're going to go through every single ruling that was sustained, that was overruled. They're going to scrutinize the jury instructions. They're going to scrutinize the fact that Judge Merchant allowed Stormy Daniels to talk about not using protection during this alleged sexual encounter. Those are all things that were not relevant to this trial. But I think what no one's talking about, which should be at least briefly spoken about, was the road not taken here, the defense not taken. And I think that if Miliana was there, if she was there and she testified and she explained that maybe this...
Melania?
Melania, his wife. Maybe that this payment was made in furtherance of keeping the sanctity of marriage, in furtherance of keeping their family intact, versus to have the American, persuade the American public that something didn't happen. I think that would have been a much better defense than these payments were just made to Michael Cohen for legal fees. I think Michael Cohen could have made these payments in defense of the sanctity of his marriage, to protect his marriage, and not to, you know, make the American people think something that didn't happen happened.
But then we're going into federal election law, and that is very dicey, and you have to be very well versed at federal election law to tell, what's for one and what's for not. So we're going to turn things over now to Linda Schmidt, who's back on the scene there. She's been talking to quite a few people throughout the afternoon, and as this has broken, Arthur Aidala, a former judge, she has the very latest on what's going on there right now.
All right, Linda.
Yeah, hi there, Bianca and Steve. We have attorney Arthur Aidala back with us, thankfully here to do some more talking, because, I mean, your insight, because you've been doing this forever. You work out of this courthouse here. You've been in these courtrooms, so you have a perspective that most people on the planet do not have. So, again, I wanted to ask you, you and I were just talking, do you think the prosecution was surprised by, first of all, the guilty verdict, and second of all, how quickly they reached that guilty verdict?
Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, just so you know, I was actually in the courtroom, not today, but in the past, and I just want to throw a bouquet to the court staff here, because this case was so well organized by the court officers and the clerks and everyone, and it could have been pandemonium, and it wasn't.
It ran very smoothly. I mean, from a journalist point of view and what we had to deal with, it was very smooth.
And there are moments when I'm not proud of what happens here, but as I said, I've kind of grown up here. I'm so proud of the way this courtroom, this courthouse, and New York City handled such a huge event. Do I think the prosecutors were surprised? I think they were very happy last night when they went to sleep and the jurors wanted to hear David Pecker's testimony. That was their best witness. And and he said, I'm friends with Trump. I still consider myself to be a friend with Trump, as opposed to Cohen, who, was throwing daggers at him for years now. So I don't think they were so surprised, especially when the verdict came in relatively quickly. I think they were confident in their case. They did what they needed to do. They obviously prepared. I mean, I think Stormy Daniels was prepared for days. I know Cohen, they said, was prepared for 100 hours. 100 hours is a very long time to be prepared, and he did well. He stayed nice and calm. They always wanted him to lose his temper. He didn't lose his temper, and they got the result that they worked hard for. Let's see, what appellate judge says down the road. Let's see how this affects the world. I mean, and I don't say the world lightly. Let's see how this changes the image of the United States of America in the whole world.
Yeah, you're talking about David Pecker, and again, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, a longtime friend of Donald Trump. He did not have an axe to grind. Like you said, when he testified, he looked right at Trump and he said, I still consider Mr. Trump a friend. It's not like somebody like Cohen, who admitted on the stand that he can't stand Trump, that Trump going to prison was something that he wanted, and it was something that he wanted for himself personally, was to see Donald Trump go to prison. So I guess what you're saying here is that David Pecker, his testimony carried way more weight than Michael Cohen's did. It just happened to corroborate what Michael Cohen was saying.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if we find out weeks or months from now that right now Pecker sent Trump a text saying, hey, man, I'm sorry. Like, I had no choice. Because he was subpoenaed to be here. They made that very clear. And, I mean, look, I think the biggest lie of all of them that Michael Cohen told on the stand was, and he said, it was better for him if Trump is acquitted than if he's convicted. Because he's trying to sell books. He's trying to sell a TV show.
He's got a podcast.
He's got a podcast. Obviously, it's better for him. So
okay.
We'll see.
All right. Okay. Back inside to you guys.
Good deal. Arthur, Linda, we appreciate it. Thanks so much. And it's 6 o'clock. We are continuing to follow the breaking news this afternoon, where Donald Trump has been found guilty on all 34 counts in his criminal hush money case.
We have been following this all week long. We've had reporters in and out of the courtroom, and Fox 5's Morgan McKay was live in the courtroom when this all happened. A shocking surprise for you as you were about to be leaving for the day.
You're exactly right, Steve and Natasha. When the judge announced that the jury had reached a verdict, they would just need an extra 30 minutes. The entire room gasped. Reporters were completely caught off guard when this was announced, because a lot of them thought that this was going to be, they were going to be breaking for court at the end of the day. The announcement came at 4:35. The judge had said that the jury was going to be dismissed at 4:30. So everyone was pretty much on their way out the door. But then the judge said that the jury had reached a verdict. They waited an extra 30 minutes, brought the jury in, and the jury found Trump guilty of all 34 charges. Now, the former president, while this verdict was being read, he folded his arms across his chest and stared straight ahead. Now, his attorney, Todd Blanche, he put his head in his hands a couple times when this verdict was being read, and then afterwards, Trump stood up. He looked a little bit emotional as he left the courtroom, but walked straight ahead without looking at any reporters on either side. Now, sentencing will be July 11th. His attorney, Blanche, asked for this to be either mid or late July since Trump has a conflicting court schedule. Remember, he is facing numerous other trials at this time. So the judge decided to set the date for July 11th. Now, Trump could face anything from probation to house arrest to prison. Now, what's next in all of this? The Manhattan District Attorney, he came in for the actual verdict. He's going to be holding a press conference at 6:30. Now, some media organizations did ask the judge if they could speak to the jury. They asked that a room be set aside for jurors, anyone who wanted to talk to the media, but the judge denied this request. He did say to the jury that if they wanted to speak to media, that they could. However, we just got word that they did all leave in a van the court provided. Now, throughout this entire trial, the jury has remained anonymous. Nobody knows exactly who they are. They were very careful when jury selection began. They only let in around 6 reporters in a jury pool to sit there when jury selection was going on. So not even all the reporters even saw the jury's faces before they were actually chosen. There were also 6 alternates, but they were set aside in a different room while the main 12 jurors deliberated, and that was 7 men and 5 women. So again, this was a very big day. It caught a little bit everyone by surprise. Everyone was sort of expecting this to happen tomorrow and not necessarily today. Reporting live, Steve and Natasha, back to you.
Very well. All right, we appreciate it. And Michelle Ross was inside the Overflow room during today's deliberations when that verdict came down.
That's right. She joins us now outside of the courthouse to tell us what she saw and just the reaction from the media, especially being firsthand seen reaction from former President Donald Trump.
That's right. And just to reaffirm what Morgan was saying, we were all kind of, expecting this day to wrap up and kind of packing up and getting ready to go. So many of the reporters inside were kind of disengaged until we heard Judge Juan Merchan come onto the screen and say that we have reached a verdict, but the jury wanted an extra 30 minutes. And in those 30 minutes, you could cut the tension with a knife in that Overflow room. There were many people just standing straight, anticipating what was going to happen. It automatically went silent after that. But once 30 minutes later, after Judge Juan Merchan came in, the jurors came in, and one by one, they went through each of those 34 counts. The first count, there was an audible gasp you could hear from one of the reporters, but after that, it was pretty silent, most likely because the court officers had prefaced, to let us know to not have any outbursts, to keep any outbursts to a minimum. But going on from there, it was quiet. Everyone, you could hear the typing going on, all of the reporters, typing away to their respective outlets about the updates. Each count, guilty, count number 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 34. Now, once we were officially given the okay to leave, everyone got up to, run out to do their live shots here, like how we're doing now. And I actually spoke to one of the members of the public. There were 2 of them in the Overflow room. And I asked her, what brought her out here today? And she said that she'd been following this case all the way from the beginning and thought, hey, I'm in New York. I want to see if I'll be able to get in. Not thinking that she would get into the building at all, but she got into the Overflow room. A couple of the other members of the public actually got into the courtroom where Donald Trump was, where his team was, the jurors. And I could see from a screen in the Overflow room as the verdict was coming down, each guilty verdict that came down, their faces were stone cold. The former president, in addition to all 3 of his lawyers. Now, his lawyers, including Todd Blanche, he was rubbing his face in his hands, obviously upset, visibly disappointed in the outcome of this. Same with his attorney, Susan Necklace. And when it comes to Emile Beauvais, he was just standing straight, stone cold as well. So that was a reaction that we were able to see from inside of the Overflow room.
Very well. We appreciate it. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Well, joining us now with more insight in today's verdict is Imran Ansari. Let's bring in criminal defense attorney. We have some questions for you, especially for some viewers. I know one's watching right now who is my father. He's actually a former Superior Court judge in L.A. His question to you is a case involving 2 reasonable interpretations of the facts. The jury must accept the interpretation that points to innocence. How could the jury completely dismiss the version that the payoff was not to protect his marriage? I'd love for you to answer that.
Well, I think it's the evidence and the arguments that the prosecution put before this jury to suggest otherwise. Of course, you remember some testimony. I remember Hope Hicks testified, and there was some testimony there that gave some credence to the defense theory that this wasn't about any election or, somehow protecting his image for the upcoming election, but it was rather protecting his image before his family and Melania. And that was one piece of testimony that the defense would argue, that this wasn't about any sort of criminality, but the prosecution argued otherwise. And we just have to take, at this point, the verdict as it was rendered by the jury, and that was guilt, unanimous, on all 34 counts. Again, we know that the defense is going to be looking at this trial and going and pouring through the transcript, pouring through the evidence, the judge's decisions, and getting an appeal together. And that's something for another day. But for today, we have to say that this jury looked at the evidence, they deliberated, they came to a decision, and that was guilt on all of those counts. Were the defense theory was the alternative explanation as to the motive, intent, knowledge of Donald Trump put forward before that jury vigorously by the defense? Yes, but they didn't take the defense theory. They found that the prosecution proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yep.
You know, it's interesting, too, if we sort of zoom out, Donald Trump is facing 4 separate criminal trials right now, but it appears, certainly as the clock winds down to the election, this is going to be the only one that's resolved prior to the election, which he seemed to even mention as well when he said in his comments, you know, the real appeal will be November 5th or whatever, which is Election Day. I'm just curious your reaction to that when you sort of look at the big picture of all the issues he was facing heading into the election and where things stand right now.
Well, see, I think his numbers...
base, but the real concern is with people that are undecided or people that are in the middle. This could sway them to vote a completely different way. Imran, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll chat with you in just a second. Right now we're going to turn things over to what's happening in the Biden campaign, because they have reacted to the guilty verdict.
That's right. Sharon Crowley joins us more with what the president had to say about this. Sharon.
Yeah, social media is really blowing up with reaction to this verdict. We're going to get right to it in a second, but the first reaction we're getting is from former President Donald Trump, who took to Truth Social, posting several comments with just within the last hour, including, quote, "My civil rights have been totally violated. violated with this highly political, unconstitutional, and election interfering witch hunt, a phrase he's used many times before, going on to say our failing nation is being laughed at all over the world. Now let's go to President Joe Biden. President Biden says there's only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box. And he included a button to donate to his campaign. Now, the Biden-Harris campaign also posting saying that in New York today, we saw no one is above the law. Donald Trump has always mistakenly believed he would never face consequences for breaking the law. And we're also hearing from Trump loyalists and former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani.
Today's verdict officially marks the end of the United States being able to describe itself as a nation of laws.
And Republican strategist Rick Wilson, who calls himself a never-Trumper, posting, now that Donald Trump is a convicted felon, he can no longer vote or own a gun. We'll have much more coming up in the next few minutes as we continue to update and get reaction from around the country on this historic verdict.
Very well. All right. Thanks, Sharon. And joining us now to offer some more insight into today's verdict, defense attorney Carrie London. We've now basically had an hour or so to let it all soak in. Do you have any more elaborate thoughts now that we've had time to let us think about it a little bit?
Yeah, I think that Trump's choice of attorneys in Todd Blanche and the two females that he chose, Melina, I think he might have needed more aggressive representation. I think he got rid of Joe Tacopina, but I think Joe Tacopina might have been the guy for this case. I think that the closing summations by Todd Blanche was about 2 to 3 hours. By the DA was about 5 hours. Those are very long. I was told they were very wordy. I was told there wasn't so much showmanship. I wasn't in the courtroom, but a jury like this, I think, needed showmanship. They needed somebody to stand up and put on a show for them. Because when you're on trial, especially in a case like this, it's a likability contest. It's a popularity contest. It's who do the jurors connect with more. And when you have a very polarizing defendant like Donald Trump, who's not going to take the stand, and Bianca, you asked a very interesting question earlier. Why didn't President Trump take the stand? Criminal defendants never take the stand.
Well, it's funny you bring up a popularity contest, so they must have really loved Michael Cohen then.
Michael Cohen, I saw this weekend at a restaurant. I saw him at Biblo K in Sag Harbor, and everyone was hugging him. Everyone was patting him on the back. Everyone was saying, great job. People had preconceived notions before going into this trial where they wanted to convict Trump. And I think the only way out of this was, as Imran said, defend the sanctity of marriage, have Miliana testify for him, and maybe Donald Trump should have testified, as you alluded to earlier.
Interesting. We talk about some historic cases. I mean, some of them, like memorable ones, O.J. Simpson's case. For people that watched that trial, the entirety of it, they were not surprised with the verdict. For people that watch here and there in the news, they were surprised. Do you think it kind of mirrored what happened here for people that were following along, that were inside of the courtroom, that saw every single detail compared to people that casually kind of popped in and out with information on this?
That's a great question, and I can tell why you grew up in a household with a father who's a judge, because that was a very judicial question. It's in theory versus in practice, right? We only saw what we saw in the news. Me and you were not inside the courtroom. We only read the pieces of the transcripts that were released. We didn't see every witness testify. We didn't judge the demeanor of every witness. We didn't judge the demeanor of Trump's defense counsel, of the prosecution. And so I think this will be something people talk about in 100 years, but I think it will be because it's a case of first impression. And I think we've never tried to former president criminally. We've never convicted a former president criminally. And I think everyone is going to be thinking about this when the Netflix special comes, when the True American Crime Story comes on this Donald Trump case. Everyone's going to be thinking about in theory versus in practice. So you're right. I have no idea what those jurors were thinking when they were inside the courtroom, observing these witnesses, evaluating these witnesses to determine the veracity of their statements. But to think you can get a conviction on the smoking gun being Michael Cohen, who's a professional liar who admitted to theft on the stand, I just don't see sitting well with the appellate division. I just don't see this case being affirmed. I see this being overturned. And I see, as you alluded to earlier, this is going to push certain people in one direction who might have voted for Trump, push certain people.
All right, Carrie, just 1 second. We're looking right now live outside Trump Tower. You can see the former president walking into the building, giving a fist pump up to the waiting news copters above, knowing they're all there buzzing over 5th Ave, 57th. And you see him clapping, sort of trying to strike a defiant tone and whatnot as he walks into the building, waiting to go on the corner and waving to supporters lined up outside. Certainly a pretty amazing image right now, as you mentioned, the first former president to be ever convicted of a crime. 34 crimes, guilty on all counts.
It's interesting. You see the body language here, as you mentioned, defiant. However, when we talk to Morgan Mackay, who has been following this inside of the courtroom this entire time, the body language that she mentioned was defeated, stoic, very serious. So as he is making his way inside this building, he might be putting on another kind of face to the people out in front of Trump Tower. Let's turn things over to Linda Schmidt, who is in Lower Manhattan, who has been following this case as well, has talked to quite a few people outside of the courthouse. Linda, your update as of now.
Yeah, you know, Bianca, you and Steve are talking there about the president's body language, and of course my colleague Morgan Mackay talking about his body language when he was in court, and they came down with the guilty verdicts. You know, it seemed as though after the jury asked the judge to reread the instructions yesterday, and then he ended up doing that today. When Trump spoke yesterday, it almost seemed as though, and this is what some people, some observers of this case have said, it almost seemed as though at that time he was almost admitting, hey, it looks like I'm going to end up losing this, when he said Mother Teresa could not beat these charges. That is a defeatist statement, and we were surprised to hear that come out of his mouth during the 4 weeks of this trial, because he has always said every single day, this is a rigged trial, this is political, this is a political witch hunt, and he was always defiant. Yesterday he was not defiant, you know, quote, it's saying Mother Teresa couldn't beat the charges. Now, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is going to be having a news conference at 6:30. That's 15 minutes from now. That always happens, especially in big cases. The DA, whether they win or they don't win the case, they will hold a news conference, and I'm sure it's something that's going to be brief. It usually is. He usually comes out, makes a statement, and that statement could last maybe 5-6 minutes, and then he'll take a few questions, and that will be that. So that's going to be happening at 6:30. But all of the physical evidence, for the most part, came down to 11 checks, 11 invoices, and 12 ledger entries. And some of those checks included Donald Trump's signature on those checks, showing that he had reimbursed Michael Cohen, his former attorney and former fixer of many, many things, had reimbursed him the $130,000 that Michael Cohen had paid Stormy Daniels on the night before the election in 2016. And the whole reason that they paid her off was to keep her quiet. And again, the lawsuit was based on the fact that prosecutors said that the reason that this rose to a felony is because the former president wanted to affect the outcome of an election. In other words, he was concerned that Stormy Daniels' information getting out could hurt his chances of being elected in 2016, and so they wanted to basically just shut her up and kill her story, and they paid her the $130,000. So now the former president has been found guilty, and he has been found guilty of violating New York State election law. Now, again, Morgan had mentioned this earlier. The sentencing is going to be July 11th. That's what the judge set in court today. It's going to be July 11th. Interestingly enough, that is just a few days before the Republican National Convention, and Trump is the presumptive Republican nominee for the presidential election here in 2024. So the timing of that also very interesting. As far as everything that's going on right here around court, hundreds of media here. I'm looking at one group that's in the park that's probably, I don't know, maybe 15 yards from where we are right now. It's right across the street from the courthouse. We've got the Trump supporters on one side. They are very quiet right now. They were not happy at first, of course, when that verdict came down. And then to my right, there is another group with signs that say "Lock him up," and they were cheering when the guilty verdict came down. But the two groups, mainly calm, nobody arguing, nobody going at one another because they are keeping them separate. And it's relatively quiet around the courthouse. You know, when Attorney Arthur Aidala was here just a few minutes ago and we were talking, he said that he wanted to give a shout out really to the court officers and to the court because this really was handled very smoothly. Morgan Mackay, my colleague, was here pretty much every single day of the 4 or 5 week trial. I was here on several different occasions, and everything ran really smoothly. And when you think that you're dealing dealing with a landmark case. I mean, this is history. From the very beginning, from the indictment until today, all of this is history, and we are witnessing history being made here. Not good history, but history. Back inside to you.
Very well. Yeah, well said. All right, thanks, Linda. Let's go back to Morgan McKay. And Morgan, you've sort of been locked down in that position since the verdict came down. By now, you've probably had a little bit of time to sort of take a breath, go through social media. I'm just curious where you stand an hour after the verdict or so, an hour and a half has come down, what your thoughts are as we've had a little time to reflect on it all.
You know, Steve and Natasha, I keep thinking back to former President Donald Trump's face as he was leaving the courtroom. He did visibly grimace, wince a little bit as he left. You could just really see the pain, and that was really the first time I think I've seen a large reaction out of him, out of this entire trial. He stayed pretty stoic as they read off all 34 charges, finding him guilty, staring straight ahead with his arms crossed. But I am just really surprised still to see the reaction from him inside the courtroom, especially since the appeals process probably will play out past the election, but it will be interesting to see just how this all turns out with the sentencing. Now, when it comes to sentencing on July 11th, there are a couple things he could face: probation, house arrest, or even jail time. Now, the jury, when they were convicting Trump, they had to find that he falsified 34 business records. Then they had to find that he falsified those business records in order to conceal a second crime, which prosecutors allege was a conspiracy to aid an election by unlawful means. Now, this is where it got a little tricky. Those unlawful means, that could have been a couple of different things. It could have been tax evasion. It could have been breaking state election law. And so the jury really had to go through all 34 charges and decide that for each check and invoice that Trump used to pay his lawyer, Michael Cohen, back, because prosecutors say that Trump paid Michael Cohen for these hush money payments. Cohen, on Trump's behalf, paid adult film star Stormy Daniels $130,000 to keep quiet about her alleged sexual encounter with Trump ahead of the 2016 election. Now, what's next in all of this? Well, I believe Trump has left, and now we're just waiting for the Manhattan District Attorney to give a press conference. He did enter the courtroom a little later today, right when they announced that the verdict was reached. He entered the courtroom. He appeared maybe 3 or 4 times throughout the trial. It wasn't that often. He appeared for people like Michael Cohen when he was testifying. Now, one thing I do want to add just about the security here, it has been an adventure getting in every morning. We had to line up reporters. There was about 1 reporter for each outlet. They got what's called like a golden ticket, you could say. They were allowed to line up right in front of the courthouse. Everyone else was trying to get a chance to get into the overflow room. They had people camping out overnight trying to get in. But for the main courthouse, for the main courtroom, I should say, the reporters that were going in there, we got to line up around 7:30 outside the courthouse. We were let in, but 2 levels of security you go through, pretty much like a metal detector, as if you're going through an airport security. You go through the first level, then you go up to the 15th floor, and then you go through a second level. And the court officers, I have to say, have just been incredible throughout this process, very patient. They tried very hard to keep reporters just under wraps. I know there was times they got a little rowdy, especially inside the courtroom with the jury deliberating just next door. So they really just wanted to make sure that reporters were quiet, just to make sure that everything seemed fair for the jury and for everyone inside the courtroom. Steve, Natasha?
Very well. All right. Thanks, Morgan.
All right, we're going to turn things over to Teresa Perillo, who has been in Lower Manhattan. She's getting reaction from people that are there on the streets, not necessarily inside the courthouse. As we can tell, it's hard to get in there as we don't have the golden ticket. But what are you hearing from people there on the streets? I feel like there's going to be some divided and some division between the people on one side and the people on the other.
Well, we can tell you, Bianca and Steve, that at this point, everybody's behaving. That's the best way to put it. We're not hearing of any significant arrests. We're not hearing of any violence or anything like that. At this point, it really just seems as though New Yorkers came down here to witness history. Of course, they didn't know that a verdict was coming today. They wanted to just get a feel of what was happening. You could understand that. That often happens with these very big stories. We also saw that with Weinstein and with other cases. They've done that today, and it just so happened that a few people who came down here were there at the exact exact moment in which a verdict was reached and then a verdict was announced. And as it was announced to the crowd, people were listening and watching on their phones, and they were screaming out, "Guilty on all counts, guilty on all counts." So that is how people found out in Collect Palm Park. I'll step out of the way so you can see the park behind me. It's not as busy as it was when I joined you a short time ago, but still there are a significant number of people here. The park is effectively split by the pond into, the pond is in the center on one side, anti-Trump on the other side, very pro-Trump. People have their signs ready. That sign right there that says Trump convicted, on the other side it says Don the felon. We also see signs of lock him up. The former president's mugshot from Georgia is also on a couple of signs as well. Again, people are vocal here, but they are, the best way to put it, they're being polite. Again, no incidents of violence or anything like that. That is due in large part to the good work of the NYPD down here and also the court officers that are keeping this park peaceful, that are ensuring that nothing goes on. They are allowing people the right to assemble, and in turn, people are behaving. So we heard from some people who said this is accountability. We have been waiting for this moment. Another person told me that they, in their opinion, believe this is lies, lies, all lies, and they think that this is directly tied to the former president's political ambitions. They say this is an effort to keep him from the White House. But I did find one person in the masses who was split down the middle, who had mixed reaction to this verdict. Take a listen to him and his son.
I'm happy that we have faith in our justice system. You know, the mere aspect that a jury of his peers looked at the evidence and actually made a decision. I can see where some people would be very jubilant about that, but on the same token, very somber, because we're looking at a country that has convicted its first former president of the United States. So I wonder what that's going to do for the country.
What is really interesting is if you walk from one side of the park to another, on one side you have people saying that this, in their opinion, means that they can't trust the justice system. Walk to the other side of the park, people saying this restores their faith in the justice system. So it really is very interesting to be down here. I can tell you unequivocally, Bianca and Steve, for those who are pro-Trump, they tell us this makes them want to vote for him and support him even more. This emboldens them even more to support effectively their guy. That's the latest from Lower Manhattan tonight. Back to you guys in the studio.
Living in two different worlds, that's for sure. It is wild, the difference you can see between the street, one side to the other. All right, thanks, Teresa. And we're going to go back to Imran Ansari, a former prosecutor, and we are waiting, Imran, in a few minutes. We're expected to hear from Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who brought this case. What would you expect him to say in this press conference after securing this conviction?
I expect his speech will be the sort of prosecutorial line. You know, after a conviction in a high-profile case such as this, even though this is unprecedented, you expect to see the district attorney go out there and sort of tout the victory to the press and give the statement on behalf of the district attorney's office. I would hope that Alvin Bragg does his best to keep this as non-political as possible. I don't necessarily expect him to go out there and make this a political rant in any ways, but there's a lot of distrust right now in this prosecution and now this conviction. So I think he would be best served to go forward and not necessarily do a victory lap, but go there and rather give a statement to the press that's short and sweet. I think the verdict right now speaks for itself, and whether you're looking at that verdict and celebrating it, so to say, on one side of the street, as we just mentioned, or you are protesting it on the other side of the street, the prosecution should be coming forward here and not doing a victory lap, but just simply making a short, simple statement on behalf of the district attorney's office, because, you know, the press, they're expecting that. Yeah. The American public, in many ways, will be expecting that. But I would be very cautious as to the choice of words in order to maintain the integrity of the prosecution here when there's a lot of skeptics, and really maintain the integrity of the conviction when there are a lot of skeptics, Imran, and of course an appeal on its way.
Let me ask you, that was a very interesting take on that. Speaking about Alvin Bragg, when he brought this indictment, he didn't necessarily specify what that secondary crime was, and that is because of a specific statute to New York. Was that interesting for you when you kind of heard that? Because they only disclosed that, I think it was just the very last day.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely interesting, and it also had a lot of people looking at the indictment, which was already confusing to begin with. When this indictment was released, a lot of us were looking at it, trying to analyze it and saying, where's the crime? And still, people to this day, even right now as we speak, are saying, where's the crime? And I think it was interesting how there was this delay in terms of the specifics as to the crime and the indictment. And that will perhaps be one point in the appeal that we may see, is how this indictment was handled, how it was the defense was able to prepare a defense in advance of trial. So I think it may be an issue that we will see when the conviction is appealed.
Yeah, interesting. Fair point there. All right, Imran, we appreciate it. We'll probably check back in with you in a little bit. We're going to go right now to Richard Giacovis, who is posted up live outside Trump Tower. What's the scene there? Richard, just a few minutes ago, we saw the helicopter shot of Donald Trump outside waving to people outside. What's the mix of people you're seeing pro versus anti-Trump lined up outside Trump Tower?
Steve, it's been very contentious out here for the last couple of hours. You have a number of the former president's supporters here, and then you have a number of people who are yelling back and forth at those supporters, and then them yelling back. And it's especially contentious since the former president arrived here just about 20 minutes ago. We'll show you the video. The president coming out of his motorcade and arriving just about 6:10 this evening, and he walked over as far as he could over to the crowd of supporters, and maybe those who don't support him but maybe just wanted to get a photo or a picture of him across the street from Trump Tower. He pumped his fist and he waved and he pointed and he almost thanked them for their support, and then went back inside of Trump Tower. He's expected to come out again tonight to go back to a dinner. We don't know what time that will be, but again, there's been a lot of back and forth here. A lot of people for the former president, a lot of people against him, and that's the mix here at Trump Tower. But they're still camped out here waiting for him to come back out and watch him go to dinner. Again, a historic day, and outside of Trump Tower, the former president's residence here in New York, where he will be coming out in just a little while. We will have that for you, but you saw that video there. The president coming and waving to those supporters and pointing at the ones who were cheering him on and asking him to come over. We did yell out to the former president if he plans to appeal. He did not take any questions, or even if he could hear us over the loud cheers and then some boos, but he went back inside of Trump Tower, expected to come out at any moment to go to dinner. We'll send it back to you guys.
Well, all right, Richard, interesting perspective there. So there you have it. You know, history in action. Pro and anti-Trump forces lined up outside Trump Tower, as we've seen time and time again over, what, 7-8 years now at this point, plus. Pretty fascinating. You heard him mention he's going to a dinner tonight. Obviously, now we're going to start fundraising off this in earnest as we really see the presidential campaign heat up. This is going to basically be potentially the defining issue of the campaign.
It'll absolutely be one of the defining issues of the campaign, and both sides are being very aggressive with fundraising. You saw Biden's tweet, or X, where he said that, you know, the only way to stop this man is to donate here, and Trump apparently sent out a message on Truth Social that he's a political prisoner right after the verdict was read, and we all need to donate now. And I think a lot of people are going to be using this to either prove their point or disprove the other side.
It's interesting you bring that up, because this does very little to inflame the Democratic base. They already hate Trump. So when we're looking at people that are independents or undecided, what do you think this does?
I think it's going to push people really strongly one way or the other. I think the independents and the undecideds might think that Trump absolutely was scapegoated and is a political prisoner, and it'll push them towards him. I think it might push other people and say, oh my God, he tried to trick the American public and lie to us. I absolutely hate him. I am absolutely not voting for him. So Bianca, I think it'll go either way.
Yeah, it's interesting. There has been like some polling that there is a small portion of the persuadable electorate that would be moved by the idea of being a convicted felon. Like that was a step too far for a certain amount of people, which again, it all, you know, we'll have to just wait and see at this point, basically. I want to ask the same question we asked Imran Ansari about what we expect to hear. Right now, by the way, we're waiting to hear from Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, expected to give some sort of press conference. Likely will be short. What would you expect to see from this press conference?
Well, you have to understand that Cy Vance originally tried to indict Trump on different charges than this and basically gave up after 2 years of convening grand juries, and, you know, some of the ADAs wrote books about it. So Alvin Bragg, give him credit. He saw an avenue, he saw a road, he convened a grand jury, he indicted Trump on
these... And it's interesting to even go further back into that. When he got into office, he sort of looked like he wasn't going to prosecute Trump. And then at some point did a 180 was a very surprising twist of turn since he came into office, you know, the past couple of years or so.
Absolutely. The grand jury is also a secret proceeding, so we have no idea what Bragg was doing behind closed doors, even if he was saying one thing to the public and maybe doing something else with the grand jurors. But I expect Bragg to come out and say this was a monumental case. They pushed democracy forward. They're very happy with the verdict. His DAs did a great job. The jury listened to the facts. The jury made the right decision, and he stands behind this conviction. That's what he's going to say.
As a trial attorney, as you know, maybe you're defending a client and you're not being told what the secondary charge was until after you read your closing statements. How do you react to something like that?
I think it absolutely goes to the appealable issues here, and I think it absolutely goes to the uphill battle that Todd Blanche and Trump's attorneys had, because the DA's office wasn't really forthcoming with, we're charging you with XYZ because of ABC. It was, well, it could be this, it could be that. You don't have to agree on this, you don't have to agree on that. You just have to agree that you don't like Donald Trump. And that's what I think the quick 11-hour, 2-day verdict told us. Because, Steve, as you said, I thought it was going to be a mixed verdict or a hung jury, or guilty on some, not guilty on others. 34 felony guilty counts for a former president.
Right, that shocked everyone, I think. We can say that for sure. We've got a split screen I can see right now. They are getting ready for the Alvin Bragg presser. It has not happened just yet, but we will bring you that as soon as it does. Certainly will be interesting to hear from him on this historic day. Again, if you just happen to be joining us right now, Donald Trump found guilty on all 34 counts he was charged with in the hush money trial here in Lower Manhattan. You know, I've seen articles about the idea that the hush money was not the proper way to refer to this case. That it was more technically what they were charging was an election interference case. What are your thoughts on how it was branded and it sort of became known as the hush money trial? Was that an appropriate way to respond to it, or branded, if you will, in the news media?
The news media branded a hush money trial to give a negative connotation to this trial. And everyone's calling it New York versus Donald Trump. In reality, it's the people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump. And in reality, it's just a campaign election trial. And by naming it the hush money trial and giving it the negative connotation that, oh my God, he paid off a porn star to trick the American people, and that's what this case is about. That's not what this case was about.
So wait, would things have been different if the internal notations were not written as a, legal expense? If you wrote it as something else, would we be here today?
No, we wouldn't be. He wrote it as a legal expense, and that was, they're claiming, masking or disguising real campaign contributions in violation of this law and that law that they don't actually have to prove. But it was about bookkeeping, it was about handwritten notes, it was about the Trump Organization comptroller's testimony. I think all of that played a part. But again, as you said, it's a circumstantial case. They can convict on circumstantial evidence. That is how prosecutors prove cases all the time. But Steve, as you said, the fact that it was known as the hush money trial when it could have just been called Trump's criminal trial, the election trial, the campaign contribution trial, they were trying to put him in a negative light from the start, which is fine. You're allowed to do that, but is it unfair? Kind of.
All right, very well. And again, as we wait to hear from Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, we're going to take that live as soon as we get there. But in the meantime, we're going to go out to Jessica Formoso, who is live, I believe, in Foley Square. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica. What's going on by you?
Steve and Bianca, that's right. I'm here in Foley Square. We actually just pulled up. I can tell you this, just to get here 2 blocks away from this area, we're right on Worth and Center. It took us, I'm telling you, about what, Paul, like 20 minutes to come 2 blocks. That's how bad the traffic is in this area. I have to say, things are very calm, though. I'm going to step out of the way and let Paul Zimmerman zoom in to show you here on the corner of Worth and Center. A small group. It was bigger when we got here, but we have seen some of the folks leave. These are people who are who are holding signs with Trump's photo that says guilty. They are happy about this verdict, that he was found guilty on all 34 counts. You can hear them chanting here, waving the American flag and holding these posters with former President Trump's face on them saying guilty. Again, when we got here, was a bigger crowd. They have left since. Now a couple of more people left here, but not many more. We were looking for some Trump supporters, which I believe what Linda was saying might be closer to her. We're about like a block and a half away from the courtroom, so they may be on the other side. A lot of police presence here, court officers, NYPD. We have seen the drones up in the sky as well, that the NYPD have the drones up flying. But things are calm. There are barricades, traffic again, a lot of traffic in this area. But overall, everything is calm. We have not seen any confrontation, but just here, this small crowd of people, of New Yorkers here just happy, cheering, happy with the outcome of today's outcome. Former President Donald Trump found guilty on all 34 counts. Of course, we're going to be out here throughout the night trying to bring you the latest if anything, evolves, anything happens. But again, very quiet. We send it back to both of you inside.
Right. All right. We will take quiet. That's good. Better than things being really crazy out in the streets, which does not appear to be the case right now. Everything seems pretty civil, all things considered. Yeah.
There would have been a concern that would have happened after we found out this shocking verdict. But Carrie, you mentioned something briefly right now. What was the cost of holding this trial here in New York, especially with DA Alvin Bragg bringing this?
In the tens of millions. The overtime for court officers, the overtime for outside security. I was speaking to court officers in the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens who were brought into Manhattan for these 8 weeks for this trial. They went till 9 o'clock at night during closing statements. That means the court officers didn't leave until probably 11 or 12, which means the city was paying overtime to all of these city employees, in addition to the fact that they had to close multiple courtrooms. They had to combine multiple courtrooms for the security of obviously this trial. But the city needs money to clean it up, to clean up the crime, to clean up the dangerousness. And the city does not have tens of millions of extra dollars to spend on prosecuting an ex-president when we have a lot more violent crime. I mean, these are 34 non-violent paperwork crimes that cost the DA's office and the city of New York, I would estimate $20 million to prosecute at a minimum.
All right, indeed. That's your opinion, for sure. I mean, what's the alternative?
Well,
you can't prosecute in New York? I mean, right? What is the answer?
The answer...
I mean, we have a lot of money in New York. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like, it was expensive, for sure. You can agree with it or disagree with it, but the fact that it costs money isn't right.
Or if it doesn't come out to the right, I guess their hopeful reaction is to hopefully that he will lose and the independents will not side with him, then that is upsetting in the end, because if you don't
right, I think we're confused. Right.
Yeah.
The reason it was a waste of money is because it will be overturned on appeal. That's why it was a waste of money.
That's the point you get to. Got it.
Because it's not going to stand.
Yes.
We're going to turn things over to Linda Schmidt, who is in Lower Manhattan outside of the courthouse. Linda's been following this all afternoon. Linda, what's the very latest that you're hearing right now?
Well, you know, it's interesting listening to you guys and also Teresa Priolo and Jessica talking about pretty much how calm it is. It is very calm out here right now. This is not like other times when we have been here. The day that he got indicted, there ended up being a lot of chaos here later in the day, because that came as a surprise to everybody too when that indictment came down. But right now, very quiet. A lot of media here from around the world, and some demonstrators, but everybody is quiet. You got pro-Trump people, you have anti-Trump people, but everyone is being civil, and they're pretty quiet. I mean, you can't even hear any chanting or anything going on right now. You know, the makeup of the jury, there were 7 men, 5 women. And as far as their professions, they had people in finance, education, technology, and engineer. And they also had 2 jurors who were lawyers. So that probably helped when they were going through the evidence. And also those lawyers were probably able to simplify the judge's instructions to the jury that he gave yesterday. He read a 55-page instruction to the jury. They asked him to read back 30 pages of the instruction today, and those 2 lawyers probably able to simplify that for the other people, for the other members of the jury, and help them get to the point of reaching a guilty verdict. Now, I interviewed Attorney Arthur Aidala, and when I was interviewing him earlier, you guys will remember, I had said to him, do you think most of the jurors had reached a guilty verdict before they even started deliberating? Because they only deliberated at most for about 8.5 hours over 2 days, which shocked a lot of people. They thought it was going to go into possibly at least tomorrow and maybe even next Monday or Tuesday. And Attorney Aidala said, yeah, in this particular case, and it does happen in other cases too, where the jury can reach a conclusion that, yes, I am leaning heavily toward guilt or heavily toward acquittal before they go into start going over all of the evidence and the testimony. But they really zeroed in, like Arthur Aidala said, and Judge Grasso, who I also interviewed, said, they really zeroed in on the testimony of David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, a longtime friend of Donald Trump, somebody who had no axe to grind, who even said when he was up on the stand here testifying that he still considers Donald Trump a friend. But what his this testimony did was it corroborated what Michael Cohen had testified to, that the two of them had met with Trump at Trump Tower in August of 2015 during the campaign and had decided to come up with this conspiracy to kill negative stories, promote good stories, and then ultimately ended up with the payoff to Stormy Daniels on the eve of the 2016 election. So obviously the jurors looked at that because that's what they focused on. They had readback from that testimony. They had the judge's instructions. And then suddenly today at 4:10, 4:15, we get word that there's a verdict. And again, it was stunning to everybody that was here. Nobody anticipated that. Nobody. Not the prosecution, not the defense, not anybody out here, not a legal expert, not a member of the media. Nobody expected that. That was a huge surprise.
All right, very well, Linda, we appreciate it. We're going to go right now to Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg, who is stepping up to the podium as we speak.
Good evening. First and foremost, I want to thank the jury for its service. Jurors perform a fundamental civic duty. Their service is literally the cornerstone of our judicial system. We should all be thankful for the careful attention that this jury paid to the evidence and the law and their time and commitment over these past several weeks. 12 everyday New Yorkers, and of course our alternates, heard testimony from 22 witnesses, including former and current employees of the defendant, media executives, book publishers, custodians of records, and others. They reviewed call logs, text messages, and emails. They heard recordings. They saw checks and invoices, bank statements, and calendar appointments. This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In the 1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey ushered in the era of the modern, independent professional prosecutor. For now nearly 90 years, dedicated professionals in this office have built upon that fine tradition. A major part of our practice during that nearly 90 years has been public integrity work, including cases involving jurists, local and state electeds, public servants, and others. I want to thank this phenomenal prosecution team, embodying the finest traditions of this office: professionalism, integrity, dedication, and service. They are model public servants, and I am proud and humbled to serve side by side with them. The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election. And while this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor. I want to conclude by expressing deep gratitude to the NYPD and the officers of the Office of Court Administration for securing the courthouse, all of our safety, making sure the courthouse and all of the other matters that are important in their own right continued seamlessly. They will continue to be and have always been incredible partners. Thank you.
And do you plan to request a prison sentence for this conviction? And do you think that Donald Trump's multiple violations of the gag order that was in place should factor into that request at all?
The judge scheduled a sentencing for July 11th. We will speak in court in that time. He also set a motion schedule. We will speak in our court filings as we've done throughout this proceeding.
Donald Trump has repeatedly targeted you personally and members of your prosecution team. Do you have a response to the former president now that this trial is concluded?
I do not.
In February, you decided not to bring a case against Donald Trump. You criticized them. You criticized when you indicted him in March 2023. You criticized when people really started to understand that case. How do you think of all that now, seeing the results of that? Can you kind of put that in context, your personal history?
I did my job. Our job is to follow the facts and the law without fear or favor. And that's exactly what we did here. And what I feel is just gratitude to work alongside phenomenal public servants who do that each and every day in matters that you all write about and make the press, and in lots of matters that you don't. I did my job. We did our job. Many voices out there. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
Could I ask Mr. Steinglass, many people said the prosecution was masterful and flawless. Just want to know how you feel at this moment. Sorry. I'll let you back. How do you feel?
Mr. Steinglass, I think some of you probably saw him speak for a little bit the other day. So he's done his job, as has this team. And he just told me, tell him how I feel. I think you said that. I will just say just enormous gratitude. You know, our system, I talked about the jurors at the beginning of my remarks. We have a phenomenal system. 12 everyday New Yorkers. They listen to the judge's directions. They follow the evidence. You saw them in court every day. They were careful and attentive. And so I feel deep gratitude to work alongside them, to be a part of this system. And I just want to echo that this is what we're doing every single day. I mean, during this trial, just this week, right, a ghost gun indictment, Grimaldi's wage theft plea resolution, sex crimes, convictions, all sorts of work that's being done by phenomenal public servants. So we're before you today on this obviously consequential matter, but this is what we do every day. We follow the facts and the law without fear or favor.
If a jail sentence is in the cards, it is likely that Trump and his attorneys would seek a stay on enforcement of that sentence pending appeal. If that were the scenario, would your office object to staying the sentence?
I'm going to let our words in court speak for themselves when we get to the sentencing matter. I'm not going to address hypotheticals. They raise arguments, we'll respond. And I think your question really underscores an important point. This is an active, ongoing matter, right? We have other phases of this going ahead. We will continue to do our speaking about this matter, about issues like that in court.
All right, last one.
From day one, kind of the viability of this case has been questioned in all sorts of media outlets, all over the place, including from the defendant himself. Can you respond to any of that, how you feel now that you've gotten the conviction?
So my response, again, is I did my job. And I think particularly I talked about the history of the office. My personal history, I started as a prosecutor in 2003 in the Public Integrity Unit in the New York State Attorney General's office. I served also in the Public Integrity Unit in the Southern District of New York. These are kind of cases I've done personally, and it's a hallmark of the tradition of this office that I'm proud to lead. And I don't want to go into the whole body of litigation, but we now have a federal court decision ruling on the legal theories. We had a state court decision on the omnibus motions. But most importantly, today we have the most important voice of all, and that's the voice of the jurors. They have spoken. Donald J. Trump has been convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records. Thank you.
District Attorney, your office has been investigating this case since
Are you concerned about retribution?
All right, there you have it. That was Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg thanking the jurors for their service after securing a conviction of Donald Trump on 34 counts related to falsified business records. Let's go back to Imran Ansari, a former prosecutor, just sort of to get reaction to what we just heard the DA say there. Imran.
Yeah, so listen, Alvin Bragg is going forward, and he's going to be obviously touting the success of his office. You heard him talking about the evidence that was put forth by his prosecutors. You heard about also, acknowledging other crimes that have been prosecuted by his office, saying that this is sort of the work they do every day. But I would say that this is really something unprecedented and unique. And I think he tried not to focus so intently on that, because that will, if anything, bring some credence or credibility to some of his detractors as to why this case was brought in the first place, and the strength of that indictment, which is now have turned into 34 counts of a conviction for Donald Trump. I think he was careful with what he said, but he did make that point to hit home that Donald J. Trump has been convicted on 34 counts of falsification of business records. I think it was what we expected from a press conference by Alvin Bragg. That one question there, though, was whether the stay of the sentence, if they would go along with that. He was cautious about putting forth anything, sort of on the record, at least with the press with that. But I think he was cautious with what he said, but I know that people will be pointing to this as Alvin Bragg likely doing a victory lap, and those saying that this was a politically motivated prosecution probably pointing to some of his words that he just said in that press conference.
Yeah, Imran, you did mention, we talked to you earlier about how this speech, before he spoke, was going to just be about the facts, being grateful, being thankful, which he did say, but he did also mention that this type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do. And you mentioned that may not be actually...
Yeah, Bianca, and particularly for the New York County DA's office, you've seen the Manhattan DA's office take on these white-collar crimes very akin to how, let's say, the Southern District of New York on the federal side and the U.S. Attorney's Office would do. So that's been sort of a hallmark of the Manhattan DA's office, by virtue of also that it's Manhattan. There's a lot of business here, of course, corporations, and white-collar crime can lend itself to the city with all the businesses and finance going on here. But here, again, you cannot escape the fact that this was Donald Trump being prosecuted by the DA's office. And of course, no one is above the law, and I think that's what they're trying to hit home also. But it's also being done in an election year. It's also being done where Cy Vance sort of backed away from this prosecution at one point, and then Alvin Bragg had stated that he wasn't necessarily going to pursue this and ultimately did. So there's a lot of points for people to criticize this case, criticize the charges that were brought, and now criticize the means and manner that it was put forth before this jury. But you see Alvin Bragg going there before the press, before the American people, and exuding some confidence in the work that his prosecution
it was interesting,
done.
too. There was a question toward the end there, sort of trying to get Bragg to respond to Trump's constant criticism of the prosecution, the judge, etc. He didn't really go there, basically just pointing to sentencing, which is coming up in July.
Yeah, I mean, in this circumstance, I think it was better to be cautious and choose your words wisely if I was Alvin Bragg. We don't know how the country is really going to react to this conviction. We are really in the infancy of this news really being absorbed, digested by the American people. We're already polarized as a nation politically, and I think if I was Alvin Bragg, I would have been very cautious, as he was. But, we're really going to have to see how the country digests this news and how it's going to play out in the political arena also on appeal in the court of law.
All right, Imran Ansari, we appreciate it. Thanks so much for your perspective. It is 7 o'clock, as you see right now, and we are continuing to follow breaking news where Donald Trump has been found guilty on all 34 counts in his criminal hush money case.
That's right. We've heard from former President Trump, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg just a short time ago. A truly historic day playing out in Lower Manhattan. Fox 5's Morgan McKay was live in the courtroom when all of this went down. Morgan, coming to you as quite a shock.
Stephen, Natasha, it took the jury less than 9 hours to convict former President Donald Trump on all 34 counts. The day started out pretty slow. Most reporters were buckling in for a long day that would likely stretch into tomorrow. But around 4:15, the judge came out and said that he was going to be dismissing the jury for the day at 4:30. At 4:35, the judge came back and said that the jury had reached a verdict. At that point, Trump stoically gazed straight ahead. His arms were crossed, and then the jury was brought in, and they found him guilty on all 34 charges. And they went through each 34 of the checks and invoices that prosecutors say that Trump paid hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet about her alleged sexual encounter ahead of the 2016 election. And they said he did so in order to influence the election as well. So this took the reporters by surprise. When the judge said that the jury had reached a verdict, there was an audible gasp inside the courtroom when the jury was reading off all 34 charges. Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, he put his head in his hands a couple times. And then after this was finished, he asked for a mistrial because he said Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, committed perjury on the witness stand. So he said that the jury used his testimony in order to convict Trump. Now, the judge, of course, denied that, and he did set a sentencing date for July 11th. But on that point, now, the judge, when he was reading out his jury instructions, he said that Michael Cohen is an accomplice in this scheme. And he said that the jury had to find corroborating evidence in order to use Cohen's testimony. So they thought that the checks, that David Pecker's testimony, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, how he talked about how he met with Cohen and Trump in Trump Tower and how he agreed to squash negative stories ahead of the 2016 election for Trump in order to benefit him. And the jury found all of this credible. And now they did ask for clarification about some of those key portions at the beginning of today. And I think that's, again, why a lot of reporters were just really buckling in for a long day. But when that verdict was read and the jury was ushered out, Trump stood up. He sort of patted Eric Trump on the back a little bit, and he walked out of the courtroom. He grimaced a little bit, and he walked out with a bit of emotion on his face. So this has been a long trial, and people were expecting this to go into possibly next week. But again, the jury left for the day. Now, they were able to remain anonymous throughout this entire trial. Even when jury selection was starting, around 6 reporters would go in as a pool every single day and give updates. But it wasn't until all 12 jurors were picked and the 6 alternates did we really see and get a feel for what these jurors looked like. The judge now did give them an option to speak to the press, but they didn't set aside a courtroom like many media organizations were asking for. Now, the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, he did just give an update. And around him, while he was giving this update about the verdict, there was key portions of the testimony that were posted around him, including these notes that Michael Cohen says that he wrote on Trump letterhead outlining the $130,000 prosecutors say he paid to Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet, outlining how the checks would be received from Trump. And those checks and invoices are what prosecutors say Trump falsified in these charges. Stephen, Natasha?
Very well. All right. With Bianca here. Thank you, Morgan. Let's go to Richard G. Kovis, who is live right outside Trump Tower. And we know the former president, is still inside. We saw him wave to supporters gathered outside about an hour or so ago.
Just about an hour ago, Stephen, Bianca, we're actually waiting for the former president to come back out of Trump Tower to go to a dinner tonight. His motorcade has been parked here for some time now. We just saw a little bit of movement and some commotion across the street, so he could be coming out at any moment. We'll show you some video of the former president entering Trump Tower earlier. When he walked in, it was just less than 2 hours after the verdict was read, coming from the courthouse. You may have seen in our coverage the motorcade coming from Lower Manhattan all the way here. The president, with his 2 eldest sons at his side, walked over to the crowd of supporters as close as he can get. Some supporters and some not supporters. And he waved to them. He fist bumped them. He pointed at the ones with signs and then went back inside. This is a very contentious group of people that have been outside of Trump Tower for a while now. A lot of them screaming, "Stop the steal." A lot of them saying, "Lock him up." You have people fighting with each other. It has calmed down a little bit now since the former president hasn't been out here. That was earlier when they were waiting for his arrival. We've seen a bigger crowd gather now as we prepare for Trump to come back out, get into his motorcade, and go to a dinner. On his Truth Social tonight, the former president did post that he is planning a press conference here tomorrow morning at Trump Tower at 11 a.m. He wrote on his Truth Social press conference tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Trump Tower Atrium, MAGA 2024 with an exclamation point. Again, the former president following the guilty verdict being read back here to Trump Tower, where he will stay until he has to go to this dinner, and he'll be getting back in his motorcade. We don't know where that dinner will be tonight. But again, more supporters and some non-supporters, protesters of the former president outside of Trump Tower across the street, waiting for him to come back out, and we will bring that to you when he does. Steve and Bianca, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Richard. We've got some new information into the newsroom right now. Michael Cohen reacting with a post on X saying, quote, "Today is an important day for accountability and the rule of law. While it's been a difficult journey for me and my family, the truth always matters. I want to thank my attorney, Danya Perry, for her invaluable guidance and support throughout this process."
And the New York GOP chair, Ed Cox, reacting to that verdict. The verdict is a miscarriage of justice, more benefiting a banana republic than the United States of America. It will ultimately be overturned at the Supreme Court. Continue the quote, "The Biden administration's fingerprints are all over this purely political prosecution. We must redouble our efforts to elect President Trump and fight back against those who would wield the layers of justice against our political opponents."
All right, let's go to Michelle Ross now. She was inside the Overflow room today, inside the courtroom and deliberations, and the verdict came down. So sort of walk us through a little bit about the difference between the Overflow room. You're just basically in a room down the hall looking at monitors, right, of the courthouse and what's taking place?
That's right, Steve. So just to paint a picture for you, we're down the hall, like you said, and there are 3 monitors inside of that Overflow room. And there's a big screen right in front, and then to the side there are 2 smaller ones. And in that room are the reporters who aren't in the actual courtroom with Trump and the judge and the jurors. Now, there were also 2 seats. We couldn't, any of the press members, we couldn't sit in the last 2 seats because those were reserved for the public. But only 2 people in those 2 rows, rather, were members of the public. But there was a slight moment of panic, actually, throughout this entire day. The Wi-Fi was pretty spotty, hotspots were pretty spotty, but the moment of panic came at around 4:45 when we were waiting for the jury to come back into the courtroom when the signal froze. So all we saw on the television screen, on the monitor, were it was Trump's defense team, and it was frozen. But court staff reacted quickly. They resolved it pretty quickly, and the signal came back up. About 10 minutes later, the jury came down with their verdict. Now, throughout this entire 6 weeks, 7 weeks of this trial, it's really the Overflow room that was more reactive to testimony and exchanges that took place in the courtroom. But when the first verdict came down, out of the 34, only a few people, they audibly gasped. Now, when the additional counts came down, 2 to 34, it was pretty quiet. All you heard was typing, you know, everyone going a mile a minute with their fingers on their laptops. But also there was a court officer before we had heard the verdict. He had told us, you know, remain calm, do not, you know, keep any outbursts to a minimum, and remain in your seat throughout this entire thing. So throughout that entire time, everyone was, you know, typing away, writing down as many notes as they could. Now, during that half hour that we were given from Judge Juan Merchan, when he initially said that, you know, a verdict has been reached, but the jury wants an additional 30 minutes to finish up, you know, you could cut that tension with a knife in that room. Throughout the entire day, you know, we thought we were going to pack up. We thought we were going to have to come back here tomorrow for jury deliberations to finish. So a lot of the reporters in there, they were disengaging, you know, kind of almost staring at the walls, if you will. But when we heard that from Judge Juan Merchan, everyone, you know, stood up and they were listening intently for what was about to happen. And soon after, about, you know, half an hour later, the jury came back in and they delivered those verdicts, that verdict, rather.
Yeah, what an electric moment, no doubt about it. All right, thanks, Michelle.
All right, Michelle, we are going to be taking a quick break. Stay with us as we follow this historic and breaking news. We're going to be back after this.
what that sentence is on July the 11th, it's May 30th. From May 30th to July 11th, depending on what Donald Trump does and says, can Juan Merchan take any of that into account when factoring in this sentence here? Is Donald Trump going to have to be on a very tight leash? Does it even matter what he does in the interim? If so, will it be a factor in the sentencing?
Well, I definitely think that now that he's been found guilty, usually in these types of cases, a defendant is remanded into custody pending sentencing, meaning the defendant is held in jail while sentence is done. That's not the case here with the former president. If he violates the orders set by the judge about what he's allowed to say and what he's not allowed to say, he could potentially have his bond revoked and stay in custody while before his sentence. However, if he continues to all the terms of his release as Judge Merchan has laid out, he will stay out of custody until July the 11th when he is formally sentenced.
We're looking at these aerial pictures over Trump Tower. We don't necessarily know if the former president himself will be leaving Trump Tower to go anywhere. We know, though, that this press conference he's going to hold tomorrow morning at 11 will be held there in the Trump Tower atrium. And I just want to remind the viewers, because it's so interesting going back, June 2015, Matt, when he descended the golden escalator, he made his announcement that he's running for president. And here we are, 9 years later. And so just that political arc, I just thought is so interesting. I'm getting a lot of questions too, Matt, about what is the prohibitive restrictions on Trump now that he is a convicted felon, specifically when it comes to his voting rights. We have this in from some of our Fox producers on his eligibility to vote in this presidential election. So I'm told that as long as Trump is not incarcerated on Election Day, he will be eligible to vote in the election here. So I think that's an interesting question. I was getting it a lot, but I had to get that out there. What say you?
I definitely think that is the case. What sets up an interesting situation is Donald J. Trump is a resident of the state of Florida. The state of Florida doesn't allow convicted felons to vote. And with him, President Trump, being convicted of a felony, it sets up a very interesting conundrum. There are convicted felons who cannot vote in the state of Florida, and does the same apply for the former president because he is, in fact, the former president? I don't know. It's entirely possible he might actually, if he is ineligible to vote in Florida, he might potentially change his registration to New York, which I think might allow him the ability to. It sets up a very, very interesting scenario because most people know that he can still be president as a convicted felon. He can still run for office. He could still be elected president from a jail cell. But it sets up a very interesting situation of whether or not, depending on how the laws are applied, whether he could actually vote in the upcoming presidential election for himself.
Yeah, we were just seeing some kind of scenic shots there in Midtown Manhattan outside of Rockefeller Center, it looked like. So, yeah, those are the laws. One in Florida, a felony conviction in another state makes a person ineligible to vote in Florida only if the conviction would make the person ineligible to vote in the state where the person was convicted. And then, Matt, to your point, in New York, you lose your right to vote while you are in prison for a felony conviction. If you are convicted of a felony and you're released from prison, you can vote. If you're convicted of a felony and your sentence is suspended, you can vote here. It's kind of like the next tranche in this story, Matt. We were all trying as best we could to read the tea leaves about how the jury might come down on this case. Obviously, we know 34 felony counts, all guilty. And now the next part of this, the next phase, how might Judge Juan Merchan sentence the former president of the United States? Because he is a former president of the United States, will that factor into the sentence at all, or will Merchan not consider that? Or does he have to consider that, or not?
I think in this type of situation where you have a former president, the only way to approach sentencing is remember that Lady Justice is blind. It should not matter he's the former president. He's been convicted of a felony. What is, based on the statute and the sentencing guidelines, what is the appropriate sentence? He is a first-time offender. He has no criminal record. These are white-collar offenses. These are nonviolent offenses. All of that is weighed against the aggravations. Like, okay, this was done to cover up his involvement in the 2016 election, about how that would have affected his campaign. His conduct during trial, where he was numerous times get sanctioned by the judge by making comments about people, violating gag orders. Those two are weighed against each other. For me, what I can tell you is the most likely scenario is potentially a jail sentence followed by probation. It's very possible that Judge Merchan decides that to simply give him a probation sentence because on the theory that I'm going to allow the voters in November to decide what your sentence is, whether you should be president or not.
Wait, Matt, if I have that correctly, you think there is going to be some jail time?
It's possible. It's definitely, remember, these are felony offenses. These are not misdemeanors. Okay. It's possible, but it's far from certain, like I said. But as I stated earlier, that's probably one of the most likely scenarios, but also, I would not be surprised if he simply did a probation sentence as well. Okay. But I don't think prison is going to happen here.
All right. So, Matt, let's talk about the other characters in this case. Witnesses, jurors. We've heard from some of them, not the jurors, some of the witnesses. What is the guidance on jury testimony, so to speak, no pun intended? You know, I mean, are they going to speak out about this? I mean, they have the choice. Does it behoove them to do this? I mean, Juan Merchan says you can now talk about it amongst yourself and with people, but should they?
It all depends. A juror has the absolute right, like you stated, not to speak about anything about deliberations. They don't have to talk to anyone. If press calls them, they don't have to answer it. That is an absolute right. However, they also have the absolute right to speak about their experiences. They can talk about what has gone on in the deliberation room. When I handled many criminal jury trials, I've had times when jurors have called me to give me feedback into what actually gone on. But most of the time, they don't do anything. They just do the case and they move on. It will all depend on what they want. A lot of jurors are not going to want, given the high publicity of this case, to have their identities known and potentially be the subject of harassment. So if I were to guess, I think these jurors would probably move to have their identity kept secret.
All right, so Matt Timpanek on with me here, Andrew Kraft. It does look like there is some movement in the Trump motorcade. We just, I don't know if we caught this, I caught this briefly. We saw Trump get into the black Suburban there. We don't know where he's going. If maybe some of my producers know, they can tell me, but he's leaving Trump Tower. Not entirely sure where he's going. Of course, he told us as much that this press conference he's holding tomorrow morning will be in the atrium of Trump Tower there in Midtown Manhattan. We have a ground shot as well here. Take a look at this. So the motorcade is leaving. Of course, one of his residences is Trump Tower. There's a lot of campaign folks with him, campaign staff, supporters, many of his Republican acolytes and allies, really kind of flooding social media with messages of support as well here. So if we get a sense of where Trump is going, we'll make sure to bring it to you. I just want to thank Matt Timpanek, as always, for coming on and helping us make sense of this. Matt, thanks so much. Talk soon.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right, in the meantime here, we do want to take yet another quick commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to kind of reset. If you haven't seen it by now, Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, holding a press conference. Also, if you haven't seen it by now, former President Trump leaving court today after it adjourned with very brief remarks. And then we're going to show you the reaction on social media. So many of his allies and acolytes, like I said, flooding Twitter and Instagram and Facebook with messages of support. We've also heard from the Biden White House and the Biden campaign. So we'll get to all of that. It's a good time to reset. We'll see you in 2 minutes. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. We're going to keep it moving here with a history-making day. Former President Donald Trump in a lower Manhattan courtroom was found guilty on all 34 counts against him. That was the verdict the jury rendered, all 12 jurors in unanimity on that question here. And so we've been monitoring so much of the reaction. First, though, we want to let you listen and let you watch to how Trump responded to this when he left court today. Let's watch.
Mr. Trump, what do you have to say to the American people? Mr. Trump, how did it go to be convicted of felon? Are you worried about going to jail?
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA. And the whole thing, we didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for a convicted felon?
All right, that was the former president about 2 hours ago now responding to the guilty verdicts against him. He's now a convicted felon. Live Now look there from New York City to Washington at the White House. The Biden campaign responding this way in a statement by the communications director, Michael Tyler. He says this, quote, "In New York today, we saw that no one is above the law. Donald Trump has always mistakenly believed he would never face consequences for breaking the law for his own personal gain. But today's verdict does not change the fact that the American people face a simple reality. There is still only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box. Convicted felon or not, Trump will be the Republican nominee for president." So wanted to make sure we got that in back out live there to the White House as well. What we want to do right now, though, is play for you the press conference that just wrapped up by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, taking a victory lap of sorts with his team of prosecutors who secured this conviction today. Let's watch.
Good evening. First and foremost, I want to thank the jury for its service. Jurors perform a fundamental civic duty. Their service is literally the cornerstone of our judicial system. We should all be thankful for the careful attention that this jury paid to the evidence and the law and their time and commitment over these past several weeks. 12 everyday New Yorkers, and of course, our alternates, heard testimony from 22 witnesses, including former and current employees of the defendant, media executives, book publishers, custodians of records, and others. They reviewed call logs, text messages, and emails. They heard recordings. They saw checks and invoices, bank statements, and calendar appointments. This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In the 1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey ushered in the era of the modern, independent professional prosecutor. For now nearly 90 years, dedicated professionals in this office have built upon that fine tradition. A major part of our practice during that nearly 90 years has been public integrity work, including cases involving jurists, local and state electeds, public servants, and others. I want to thank this phenomenal prosecution team, embodying the finest traditions of this office: professionalism, integrity, dedication, and service. They are model public servants, and I am proud and humbled to serve side by side with them. The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election. And while this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor. I want to conclude by expressing deep gratitude to the NYPD and the officers of the Office of Court Administration for securing the courthouse, all of our safety, making sure the courthouse and all of the other matters that are important in their own right continued seamlessly. They will continue to be and have always been incredible partners. Thank you.
And do you plan to request a prison sentence? Donald Trump's multiple violations of the gag order that was in place should factor into that request at all?
The judge scheduled a sentencing for July 11th. We will speak in court in that time. He also set a motion schedule. We will speak in our court filings as we've done throughout this proceeding.